The rattling carriage pushes through the treacherous mountain pass, carrying travelers toward an uncertain fate. But within one of these wooden cells, a new story of survival is already beginning. Inside, a persistent voice breaks the heavy silence, demanding attention from a boy lost deep within his own thoughts.
She challenges him, pointing out that since they are both 12 years old, one of them must claim the mantle of the elder sibling.
Boy shrugs it off with cold indifference, telling her she can play the role of the older sister if it pleases her, catching her completely off guard. But with a quiet sigh, he suddenly changes his mind, deciding she is better suited to be the younger one after all.
Indignant, she snaps back, demanding to know when she ever agreed to play second fiddle to him. Yet her frustration quickly melts away into a soft smile as she reminds him of the beautiful reality awaiting them. They are to be a real family now.
The word echoes like a thunderclap in his mind, stirring a ghost from his past that he has tried so desperately to bury. Because once he too had a real family, a life filled with laughter and warmth, before everything was ripped away in a storm of blood. In the dark, rain-slicked territory of Travaches, lightning tears the sky apart over the ominous castle of his birth. This was the house of Jinneman, where young Boris was welcomed not with joy, but with the cold shadow of impending tragedy. His very birth was cursed, claiming his mother's life and leaving him wrapped in swaddling clothes beside her cold, silent coffin. The nurse whispered a desperate prayer over the newborn, wishing for him to grow into a warrior strong enough to carry his family's brutal legacy. Two sacred treasures, the sword Winterer and the armor Snowguard, awaited him, but they were treasures meant to be shared with his older brother, Yevgen. Yet their father looked upon the newborn with nothing but growing hatred, cursing the day his second son was born. Despite the coldness of their father, the two brothers forged a bond stronger than steel, playing together in the brief moments of peace they could find. But peace is a luxury in Travaches, a nation consumed by fire and the relentless ash of a bloody revolution. Lurking in the shadows was their vengeful uncle, a man cast out of the family who plotted to drown the Jinnimans in a sea of blood. Death was always just a breath away, a constant threat that could shatter their fragile lives at any moment. Yet the family code was absolute. If a bloodbath were to claim them, a survivor would always rise from the ashes to exact absolute vengeance. They had to remember to hold on to love and kindness, even as monstrous shadows crept closer to swallow them whole. In the frozen, unforgiving peaks, the ultimate decree of the Jinneman bloodline echoed. The one who survives must carry the burden of the dead. A voice from the light commanded him to live, to endure the agonizing trials of this painful world no matter the cost. For Boris, that command became his sole purpose, hardening his gaze as he prepared to face the darkness alone. Chosen by destiny, the glowing sword and sacred armor sealed his fate. He had no choice but to survive. Years earlier, during a relentless midnight storm at the Jinneman estate, the seeds of his caution were first planted. His nurse held him tight, her voice trembling as she delivered a dire warning that would haunt his dreams forever. She warned him never to venture near the estate's silent lake, especially when the storm raged. The young boy listened in wide-eyed terror as she described the horrors lurking beneath the dark waters. For on stormy nights, glowing red eyes cut through the pitch-black depths of the lake, waiting for unsuspecting prey. A monstrous beast, starved and patient, lurked just beneath the surface, ready to drag down anyone foolish enough to draw near. But when the storm cleared and a bright morning arrived, those terrifying words seemed like nothing more than a myth. Resting beneath the shade of a massive tree, Boris shared the nurse's terrifying tale with his beloved older brother. He repeated her strict warning about the cursed lake, searching his brother's eyes for any sign of fear. But Yevgen only smiled, playfully pinching his cheek to banish the lingering shadows of his nightmares. With absolute confidence, his brother promised that as long as he was there, no monster would ever harm him. Overjoyed, Boris beamed, his heart swelling with absolute trust in the brother who was his entire world. They laughed and wrestled in the grass, letting the bright sunlight wash away all the dark omens of the night before. Soon it was time to train, and Yevgen raised his wooden sword, ready to teach his little brother how to defend himself.
With a fierce battle cry, Boris lunged forward, determined to prove his strength to his idol. But his strike was effortlessly blocked, the wooden blades clashing with sharp force as Yevgen easily stopped his charge.
Placing a gentle hand on Boris's head, Yevgen advised him to watch his distance and strike only when he was truly within range.
Still, he praised the boy's form, encouraging him to keep trying and never lose his fighting spirit. Boris attacked again and again, but Yevgen parried each blow with a warm, patient smile, pushing him to his absolute limits.
Suddenly, Boris changed his tactics, diving beneath his brother's guard in a desperate, wild tackle.
The sudden move caught Yevgen off balance, sending both brothers tumbling onto the soft, grassy hill.
Lying side by side, catching their breath, they burst into uncontrollable laughter, the tension of the training completely forgotten.
They teased each other playfully, cherishing this fleeting, beautiful moment of pure brotherly love.
But high above in the mansion, a cold, silent pair of eyes watched their joy from the shadows of the window. The observer noted how deeply Yevgen adored his little brother, unaware of the dark storm that was already brewing to tear them apart. The cold click of his tongue breaks the quiet of the study, carrying a heavy weight of irritation that has been building for years.
Looking down from his high position, he spits out his disappointment, declaring the boy's weakness entirely unworthy of the family's bloodline. But a sudden, ragged gasp from the hallway shatters his thoughts, a sharp reminder of the fragile mortality that plagues his house. Years prior, on a sunlit afternoon, Yevgen raises his blade with a patient smile, urging his little brother to stand firm and trust his weapon.
Lunging forward with all his strength, Boris clashes wood against wood, earning a rare shout of praise that warms his young heart. But in a split second of overeagerness, the boy pushes too far, ignoring the danger as the training blades collide with a violent, dangerous force. A terrifying realization flashes in the boy's eyes as the strike hits too close, a sudden brush with danger that leaves him completely frozen.
Trembling with panic, Yevgen pulls his brother close, desperately apologizing for the mistake and promising never to let him face harm again. Yet the memory is brutally cut short as a servant arrives with a frantic warning. The long-dreaded elder has finally returned, awakening an ominous instinct inside Boris's chest. Outside, a torrential downpour unleashes its fury over the estate, as if the heavens themselves are screaming in warning of the tragedy to come. In the courtyard, a guard dog snarls at a cloaked shadow, unaware that the beast lurking beneath the hood is far more vicious than any hound. Inside his study, the family patriarch sits in silence, hearing the distant thunder and knowing that the storm has finally breached his walls. Heavy double doors burst open, letting in a draft of freezing wind as a ghost from the past steps boldly into the light. Vlado, the exiled brother, stands before the patriarch with a mocking sneer, met only by cold surprise from the man who banished him 5 years ago. With a chilling smile, the outcast questions if his sudden return is a disappointment, mocking the fragile peace his brother worked so hard to build. The air turns ice cold as the patriarch demands to know what dark purpose has brought this traitor back to their ancestral home. Pacing the room like a wolf in a cage, Vlado mockingly notes how frozen in time the mansion remains, a stagnant monument to their shared blood. He recalls the days of their youth when they fought side by side, remembering the resonance of clashing steel under the shadow of the old trees. In those fleeting moments, they had skipped their harsh lessons to run wild through the hills, oblivious to the destiny waiting to tear them apart. But the memory is bitter, recalling how their merciless father would beat them for failing to live up to the brutal legacy of the eldest son. Fed up with the nostalgia, the patriarch slams down a burning brazier, demanding they cut through the pleasantries and get down to business. Sinking into a chair with smug satisfaction, Vlado reveals his powerful backing, boasting that the prince-elect Khan is poised to take absolute control. When that happens, the patriarch's rival faction will be ruthlessly crushed, prompting a furious demand to leave before Vlado's treason stains the carpet. Rage erupts as the patriarch roars his sibling's name, demanding how he dares show his face after murdering their sweet sister, Yanichka. Vlado's mock sorrow instantly vanishes, replaced by a cold, wide-eyed glare as he venomously denies any hand in her tragic demise. He points a trembling finger back at his brother, screaming that if it weren't for the patriarch's own blind arrogance and filthy political schemes, their sister would still be alive, accusing the patriarch of being the true madman who drove her to her grave. The accusation strikes like a dagger, sending a tremor of pure, suffocating fury through the patriarch's hand as he grips his glass. In an explosion of absolute wrath, the patriarch hurls the heavy goblet, shattering it right against Vlado's face in a spray of blood-red wine. Wiping the liquid from his cheek, Vlado merely chuckles, remarking that time has done nothing to soften his brother's vicious, stubborn temper. With a venomous grin, he asks if his brother truly believes the next generation, his two young sons, will somehow escape this cycle of fratricide. Trembling with a murderous intent that fills the room, the patriarch issues one final freezing command. "Get out!" Standing slow, Vlado drapes his cloak over his shoulders, offering a final, bone-chilling warning that this is the absolute last chance for survival. He mockingly claims he came to offer mercy, to extend a hand of brotherhood and bury the blood feud once and for all. But his wicked smile reveals the true, insatiable greed driving his visit. He wants nothing less than the legendary Winterbottom kit. The response is the sharp ring of steel as the patriarch draws his sword, pressing the freezing tip directly against the traitor's throat. Roaring with absolute conviction, he swears that even if his skull is split in two, the sacred relics of their house will never fall into Vlado's filthy hands. Slowly backing away with a dark chuckle, Vlado slips into the shadows, leaving behind a promise to see just how long the patriarch can survive what's coming. Deep within his dark soul, Vlado whispers the order to his hidden conspirators, commanding them to initiate the bloodbath without delay. Left alone in the dark, the patriarch looks out into the relentless storm, knowing the time has come to make his final, desperate stand. Lightning strikes illuminate the barren fields outside, signaling that the first drops of blood are about to water the cursed soil. Panic erupts in the hallways as Yevgen runs at full speed, carrying Boris in his arms as they search desperately for their father. He shouts to the servants that they must retrieve the sacred relics immediately, realizing their only hope for survival lies in the ancient armory. For centuries, legends spoke of the cursed artifacts, armor forged in the fires of 100 brutal wars and stained with the blood of 99 lords. The Snow Guard, a legendary vestment of impenetrable frost, whispered to grant its wearer near immortal protection in battle. And the Winterer, a magnificent, glowing blade that drank the life force of its victims, passed down through generations of the Jinneman line. Hidden away beneath heavy locks and forgotten rumors, the mythical weapons had remained buried for decades, waiting for a worthy heir. But as the mansion walls begin to crumble, Yevgen is forced to smash through the ancient wood to seize their final hope. The secret compartment splinters open, casting a brilliant, blinding blue light upon the terrified brothers as the legendary blade is finally revealed. Back in the shadows of the mansion's dark history, a single candle flickers, casting a long, ominous shadow that seals the fate of the House of Jinneman. Guiding his oldest son down the dark staircase, the patriarch speaks of an ancient legacy, preparing him for a secret that has been kept hidden from the world for decades. Deep within the stone chamber, the family's most sacred relics await: the legendary sword, Winterer, and the impenetrable armor, Snow Guard, together forming the mythical Winterbottom kit. The patriarch reveals the tragic error of their grandfather, who divided these weapons between the brothers in a foolish attempt to force peace, unaware of the greed it would spawn.
Yevgen listens in stunned silence as his father explains that the set only unlocks its true, terrifying power when both relics are wielded as one.
Looking into his son's eyes, the patriarch reminds him of his fast-approaching 20th year and the heavy burden he must now carry as the true heir of the Jinneman bloodline. Then comes the devastating command. Yevgen must take the mythical relics and flee the estate alone, leaving his family behind to face the storm.
The weight of their entire lineage is pressed onto Yevgen's shoulders, a brutal demand to survive at all costs and ensure the family name does not perish.
But from the shadows of the doorway, a young Boris eavesdrops on their conversation, his heart breaking as he hears the cold fate awaiting them.
Years prior, in a much warmer memory, Yevgen first showed his little brother the magnificent, glowing relics resting on the bed.
With a bright, teasing smile, Yevgen asked his younger brother which of the legendary treasures looked more impressive. Staring at the shimmering blade, little Boris immediately decided that the sword was far cooler, secretly thinking the massive chest plate looked too heavy to ever wear.
Amused by his brother's excitement, Yevgen promised to give him the blade once he was strong enough, offering it to the young boy's hands.
The mystical sword proved far too heavy for the child, its tip immediately crashing onto the wooden floor under its immense weight.
Laughing warmly, Yevgen knelt down and helped his little brother lift the weapon, guiding his small hands with absolute patience. In the present, Boris reflects on those fleeting, happy years, realizing how his brother's constant encouragement made him believe the sword was his true destiny.
Yet, as his hand touches the cool scabbard, a bitter truth settles in his chest. The legendary weapon truly belongs to Yevgen, not him.
Pulling his mind back to the terrifying reality of the present, Yevgen explains that their treacherous uncle has finally launched his bloody rebellion. He tries to comfort Boris, but the word rebellion echoes in the young boy's mind, carrying a chilling weight of impending doom. Looking down the empty, silent corridors of the mansion, the harsh reality of civil war becomes clear. There is no right or wrong in a family feud, only victors and corpses. Boris recalls his father's cold lesson from childhood. In a rebellion within the family, no one is punished, and no one will ever weep for the fallen.
The memory of his father's stern, unforgiving face serves as a grim warning of the merciless battle that has now breached their home. As a child, Boris realized he didn't care about the glorious weapons or the family legacy. He only wanted his brother to survive and be there to weep for him.
In the present, Yevgen carefully tightens the straps of Boris's armor, his hands trembling slightly as he prepares his little brother for a dangerous escape. With a solemn vow, Yevgen promises to only borrow the legendary blade for this battle, swearing to return it the moment the rebellion is crushed. Pressing his forehead against Boris's, Yevgen desperately tries to reassure him, insisting that the weight of the sword is nothing compared to the strength inside him. Boris stares back into his brother's eyes, desperately wanting to believe the promises of the boy who has always been his shield. Clinging tightly to his brother's shoulder, Boris seeks comfort in the only anchor he has left in a world that is rapidly tearing itself apart. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rattles the walls of the chamber, shattering the brief moment of quiet as the siege of the mansion begins. Outside in the pouring rain, rebel forces raise a sea of burning torches, their bright flames cutting through the pitch-black night. The invaders roar demands of surrender, calling on the defenders to abandon their posts and swear allegiance to their new master, Vlado. Standing at the window in his gleaming armor, Jurkin sneers at the demands of the traitors, his eyes burning with absolute disgust. Throwing open the heavy glass doors, Jurkin looks out at the army, determined to show the invaders the true wrath of the Jinneman clan. He steps boldly onto the terrace, his voice echoing over the thunder as he demands the cowardly invaders face the light of justice. Below in the courtyard, the rebel soldiers gasp in panic as they recognize the terrifying presence of the Lord himself. But Jurkin is not alone. Behind him, a loyal mage prepares a massive, glowing magic circle to unleash a devastating counterattack. With a roaring command, the spellcaster unleashes a blinding white flame that surges violently from the magic array. Torrential magic fire sweeps across the battlefield, illuminating the dark night with a terrifying, destructive glow. The rebel forces scream in agony as the magical white flames engulf their front lines, turning their arrogance into pure terror. Seizing the moment, the loyal defenders shout battle cries, charging forward to slaughter the disoriented rebel army. Panic spreads like wildfire through the enemy ranks as they begin to break and flee from the devastating magic. Jurkin roars in triumph, but his laughter is instantly cut short as a massive shockwave violently rattles the stone balcony beneath his feet.
Sudden, paralyzing dread grips Jurken's heart as a colossal shadow rises from the smoke and debris below. A monstrous, glowing ice serpent bursts through the mansion walls, shattering stone and bone in a display of overwhelming magical power. The legendary frost beast Krygl rears its massive head, unleashing a freezing roar that turns the falling rain into jagged shards of ice. Jurken's face turns pale as he realizes the sheer scale of the threat, knowing only a master magician could summon such a legendary beast. From the shadows of the rebel army steps Jongnal, the feared archmage of Chief Elector Khan, revealing the dark alliance behind this invasion. The horrifying truth settles in. Vlado's backing is absolute, and Khan has sent his most powerful weapon to ensure the total annihilation of the Jinneman line.
Inside the collapsing mansion, servants and guards run in sheer terror as the structures begin to cave in under the beast's assault.
With a devastating slam, the colossal ice snake crushes the main tower, sending tons of stone raining down on the fleeing crowds. Desperate to save his family, Jurken runs through the crumbling halls, screaming for Boris to run, only to freeze as a sudden, chilling presence stops him dead in his tracks.
The dust settles for a fraction of a second as Yevgen desperately grabs his younger brother's hand, trying to pull him to safety. Their father blocks their path, his voice booming over the chaos with a brutal command. He will protect Boris himself, ordering Yevgen to flee alone.
Jurken roars at his eldest son, demanding to know how Yevgen expects to escape the clutches of a mercenary army while dragging a child behind him.
The harsh reality strikes Yevgen like a physical blow. He must safeguard the family's ultimate legacy, forced to make an agonizing split-second decision as his father screams at him to go. With a heart heavy as stone, Yevgen turns and sprints into the dark, crumbling corridors, carrying the sacred blade into the shadows alone. Seizing Boris's hand, Jurken pulls his youngest son in the opposite direction, their footsteps swallowed by the roar of collapsing stone. Out of the dust, loyal protectors emerge from the shadows, whispering urgent directions to guide the patriarch and the young lord through the chaos. Boris struggles to keep up, his chest burning and lungs gasping for air as he is dragged further away from the only brother who had ever shielded him. Dark, biting realization creeps into the young boy's mind. He is nothing but a burden, a weak link forced to watch his brother carry the weight of their entire survival.
Yet, even as they flee, a deep, chilling dread begins to wrap itself around Boris's heart.
An icy, unnatural sensation claws at his soul, a terrifying instinct screaming that something is horribly wrong.
Premonition becomes a silent scream in his mind. Yevgen is heading straight into an inescapable trap. Outside, the colossal frost serpent Krygl unleashes another devastating roar, shattering the night as terrified screams echo from the survivors below.
In the courtyard, loyal defenders lock shields and raise their spears, preparing for a suicidal clash against the overwhelming tide of rebels.
Emerging onto the outer grounds, Jurken and Tulk assess the damage, realizing the mansion is lost, but many of their people have managed to escape the initial slaughter.
Suddenly, a deafening crack of thunder echoes through the estate, forcing Boris to look back in sheer terror.
The ancient, majestic Jinneman mansion completely implodes, crumbling into a colossal pile of rubble and taking centuries of history with it.
Staring at the ruins of his home, Jurken's grief instantly hardens into a violent, burning rage.
He curses his treacherous brother Vlado, swearing upon the Jinneman name that he will tear the traitor apart with his bare hands. Reclaiming his composure as a commander, the Patriarch barks orders to his loyal mage, demanding an immediate status report on their remaining forces. Tulk raises his hand, channeling a surge of brilliant blue magic to coordinate the counteroffensive through the darkness.
With a roaring signal, the loyalist soldiers charge forward, desperate to turn the tide of battle despite the crushing odds.
Jurken swiftly outlines their final strategy, planning a pincer attack on the mansion's flanks to catch Vlado's forces off guard.
But Boris cries out in panic, pointing toward the colossal ice beast that still dominates the battlefield. Jurken snaps back, revealing a vital weakness. The summoned monster is a phantom, unable to harm those outside the mansion's immediate bounds. Boris swallows hard, realizing that while the beast might be limited, the human enemies hunting them are all too real. Tulk concentrates his power once more, weaving a protective stealth magic to hide their movements in the dark woods. A mystical wind sweeps through the trees, concealing the escaping survivors as they retreat into the dense forest.
Moving swiftly through the high grass, Jurkin tells Boris to lag behind and prepare to run toward the open fields the moment the fighting erupts. Terribly confused and frightened, Boris asks his father where he could possibly hide in a land overrun by enemies. The stern patriarch pauses, a flicker of heavy grief crossing his face as he prepares to send his son to a forbidden place.
Boris gasps in protest, recalling his nanny's terrifying warnings about the cursed, evil spirits dwelling near the lake.
Jurkin fiercely scolds his son's childish fears, pointing out that the dark rumors are exactly why Vlado's men will never think to search there. He commands Boris to find the 3 black trunk trees near the water's edge and hide there until the battle is won. Suddenly, a scout interrupts with an urgent whisper, signaling that the enemy forces are approaching their position. With a thunderous battle cry, Jurkin draws his sword and orders his men to charge the eastern entrance, drawing the enemy's attention. The clash is instantaneous and brutal, a chaotic storm of iron, blood, and desperate screams. Turning back one last time, Jurkin roars at his son to run, his voice carrying the finality of a father who knows he may never return. Gritting his teeth, Boris forces his legs to move, desperately convincing himself that the nanny's tales of cursed spirits were nothing but lies. Behind him, the forest erupts into a bloodbath as loyalists and rebels tear each other apart in the shadows. Suddenly, a cold, mocking voice cuts through the din of battle as Vlado steps into the fray, his blade gleaming with murderous intent. With a cruel, twisted grin, Vlado effortlessly carves through the loyalist ranks, painting the grass red with the blood of his kin. The traitor sneers, calling out for his brother and claiming that the Jinneman inheritance finally belongs to the strong. His eyes burn with manic greed, completely consumed by the madness of his betrayal. Suddenly, a rebel scout screams out in triumph, spotting the patriarch fighting desperately in the brush. Vlado snaps his head toward the sound, a predatory smile stretching across his face as his prey is finally located. Brandishing his glowing blade, the traitor strides forward to claim the patriarch's head and end the Jinneman line forever. A wall of rebel spears closes in on Jurkin, completely surrounding the exhausted lord. Gasping for breath, Jurkin looks at the circle of traitors, his eyes burning with defiance even as his strength begins to fade. The final roaring burst of strength, the patriarch swings his blade, resolving to drag every last traitor to hell with him. Driven to the absolute brink, Jurkin gathers every ounce of his remaining strength, roaring a defiant oath to make the traitors suffer for their arrogance. But before his blade can swing, a sudden, blinding agony rips through his chest as a cold steel blade pierces him from behind, accompanied by a mockingly familiar voice. The chilling whisper of his treacherous brother, Vlado, echoes right in his ear, a cruel greeting that confirms his worst fears of absolute betrayal. With a sickening splash of crimson, the blade is brutally ripped from Jurkin's flesh, tearing his strength away and leaving him utterly defenseless. Gasping for air as blood pools at his feet, Jurkin stumbles backward, realizing with horror that his brother had planned this deadly trap from the very beginning. Slow, mocking footsteps click against the dirt, closing in like a predator cornering its wounded prey. Vlado laughs maniacally, mocking his brother's fading strength and gloating that age has finally made the great patriarch slow and pathetic. In a flash of sadistic malice, Vlado plunges the sword deep into Jurkin's back once more, determined to end his brother's life then and there. Coughing up dark crimson, Jurkin's vision begins to fade as Vlado whispers directly into his ear, savoring his brother's agonizing final moments. Raising his blood-soaked blade to deliver the final execution strike, Vlado sneers that he will slaughter Jurkin and everyone else who stands in his way, only for a blinding, magical light to suddenly burst from the shadows. A thick, icy mist instantly blankets the battlefield, blinding Vlado's forces and throwing the rebel army into a state of absolute confusion and panic. Amidst the swirling fog, a brilliant frost-patterned magic circle erupts from a loyal hand, channeling a desperate escape spell. It is Tulk, risking everything to shield the dying patriarch, staring down Vlado as the teleportation magic wraps them in a blinding shroud. Enraged by the sudden interference, Vlado blindly swings his sword through the heavy mist, screaming in fury at his escaping targets. His desperate screams of rage echo through the empty forest, realizing that his ultimate prize has just slipped through his fingers.
Grimacing with pure, unadulterated hatred, the traitor realizes he has failed to secure the patriarch's head, his manic grin twisting into an ugly scowl. Staring down at the fresh puddle of blood, Vlado roars a desperate command to his men, ordering them to hunt down and kill the escaping lord at any cost. Meanwhile, deep in the dark woods, young Boris's boots tear through the damp leaves, his frantic breathing the only sound in the terrifying quiet.
The ominous silhouettes of the ancient forest loom over him as he searches desperately for the lakeside trees his father described.
Pushing past the thick brush, Boris gasps in relief as the 3 distinct dark trunks finally emerge from the shadows of the lake.
Exhausted, his lungs burning, and his body trembling with fear, the young boy collapses against the rough bark, praying that this forbidden place will keep him safe.
Hiding in the shadows, he peers out into the dark, eerie forest, his heart hammering against his ribs as the silence begins to feel suffocating.
The relative quiet does not last, as a low, unnatural rustling echoes from the thickets, shattering his fragile sense of security. Boris freezes in absolute terror, his eyes widening as the sound grows closer, drawing nearer to his hiding spot.
Clutching his chest, his mind races with desperate hope that it might be his father returning for him, or perhaps something far worse.
Surrounding woods grow deathly still, the heavy atmosphere pressing down on him as a colossal shadow stretches across the ground. Every instinct in his body screams that he is no longer alone, a paralyzing dread gripping his soul as he stares into the dark. Suddenly, a massive, muscular red tentacle whips out from the shadows, wrapping violently around Boris's waist and lifting him high into the air. A horrifying, insectoid monstrosity rises from the depths, its glowing yellow eyes and skeletal form revealing the true, legendary nightmare of the lake. Bound tightly in its suffocating grip, Boris struggles desperately for air, realizing with bitter dread that his nanny's terrifying warnings were entirely true. The monstrous beast opens its gaping red maw, staring down at its helpless prey with insatiable hunger. Squeezing the life out of the young boy, the creature prepares to drag him into the abyss, leaving Boris to wonder why his father would ever send him to such a deadly trap.
Believing his end has come, Boris closes his eyes and screams out for his father, tears of pure despair streaming down his face as he prepares to die.
But a sudden, brilliant flash of light cuts through the darkness, accompanied by a familiar, powerful battle cry that shatters the night. With a single, devastating slash, a gleaming blade slices through the monster's thick hide, instantly severing the deadly grip of the beast. Released from the suffocating hold, Boris tumbles through the air, crashing hard onto the forest floor. Covering his face as the beast's dark blood splatters onto the ground, the young boy cowers in shock, barely able to process his sudden rescue. Slowly looking up, he sees a lone warrior standing tall in the moonlight, a glowing sword of justice raised against the darkness. Firm, heavy footsteps step over the debris, approaching the trembling boy with calm, reassuring strength. As the clouds part, the moonlight fully illuminates the silhouette of his savior, standing as a beacon of hope amidst the ruin. Boris gasps in disbelief as the face of his older brother, Yefrnen, is revealed, his expression filled with overwhelming worry and shock. Without a second thought, Yefrnen rushes forward and throws his arms around his little brother, pulling him into a tight, desperate embrace. Holding Boris close to his chest, Yefrnen trembles with relief, reprimanding him for taking such a reckless risk that nearly cost him his life.
Crying into his brother's shoulder, Boris desperately explains that he was only following their father's strict command to wait by the lake.
Yefrnen pulls back, his expression darkening with disbelief as he demands to know why their father would ever send a defenseless child to such a cursed, dangerous place alone. Boris looks up at him, revealing the heavy burden of their father's final orders that Yefrnen must survive at all costs to safeguard the family's ultimate legacy. Gently touching his little brother's bruised and dirt-smeared cheek, Yefrnen fiercely rejects their father's cold pragmatism, declaring that family is infinitely more valuable than any ancient treasure. With a soft, resolute voice, Yefrnen explains that a treasure is utterly worthless if there is no family left to inherit it, promising that he will never abandon his brother for a mere relic. A warm, gentle smile crosses Yefren's face, his eyes shining with absolute determination to protect his little brother no matter the cost, wherever they must flee.
Feeling the heavy warmth of his brother's love, Boris's relief is suddenly shattered as an ominous, blinding magic light erupts right behind Yevgen's back, threatening to tear their reunion apart.
The warm comfort of Yevgen's embrace vanishes as his grip tightens with sudden, cold urgency, his warning shattering the fragile peace of their reunion. The nightmare runs far deeper than a simple family feud. The highest power in the land, Chief Elector Khan, has aligned with their treacherous uncle Vlado. It was Khan who provided Vlado with the unstoppable army of elite soldiers and dark mages that turned their home into a slaughterhouse. The conspirators seek nothing less than the legendary Snow Guard and the absolute submission of the Jinneman bloodline. And to achieve this, the patriarch must be completely eliminated. That was the only reason their father forced them to flee into the cursed woods, sacrificing his own life to buy them a few precious moments of survival. Suddenly, the dimensional magic behind them flares to life, and a gut-wrenching scream tears from Boris's throat as the bloodied, broken form of their father is carried through. Hulk collapses in despair, admitting that his strongest healing magic is utterly powerless against the horrific, flesh-rotting poison of the weapon used to strike the Lord down. Realizing the enemy is hot on their heels, Tulk begs the young master to flee immediately, but Yevgen stands frozen, torn between duty and the horror unfolding before him. A blinding flash of light from the deep forest signals that their temporary sanctuary has already been breached, leaving them with no time left to hesitate. The enemy has unleashed the Forbidden Eye of the Great Mage, a terrifying tracking spell capable of locating a single drop of blood from leagues away. Clutching his chest, the dying patriarch forces himself to look up, his fading eyes filled with a desperate final resolve to see his son safe. With the tracking spell closing in, Tulk urges Yevgen to take his brother and escape through the fading portal before the trap completely shuts. Despair threatens to swallow the brothers whole as they look upon their dying father, realizing this is their final goodbye in a world falling to ruin. Stealing his resolve, Yevgen grips his blade tightly, accepting the heavy burden of safeguarding the family's survival and their ancient treasures. Meanwhile, thunderous hooves tear through the dark forest as Vlado's executioners ride hard, closing the distance to their targets. Traitorous Uncle Vlado seethes with pure madness, realizing the young heirs have dared to enter the one place he feared most, the forbidden waters of Lake Emera. To Vlado, Lake Emera is not just a cursed legend, but the site of a dark, haunting tragedy that shattered his own youth. Decades ago, the peaceful estate was thrown into absolute terror when the horrific curse of the lake claimed its first victim. Vlado's beloved sister Yenny had been consumed by a malevolent entity from the deep, her body twisting in agonizing torment. The nightmare was so profound that those who witnessed her possession were scarred forever, forced to cover their eyes from the unspeakable horror. Vlado remembers her sweet voice from happier times, before the shadows of greed and forbidden magic tore their family apart. They had once run free in the sunlit meadows, blissfully unaware of the dark destiny waiting to swallow them whole.
She was the innocent heart of the family, a gentle soul they had all sworn to protect from the cruel realities of the world.
But bitter rivalries soon festered between the brothers, turning their childhood home into a battlefield of clashing egos and unspoken hatred.
Vlado's fury had erupted when he learned his sister was to be politically wed to a rival faction, accusing Jurkin of sacrificing her for the family's status.
Refusing to let his sister be used as a political pawn, Vlado's mind fractured, giving birth to a desperate, twisted plan to stop the marriage at any cost.
He manipulated his sister, feeding her lies about her fiancé and steering her directly toward the forbidden path of Lake Emera. Fear gripped the young girl's heart as she realized she was being urged to flee into a place of ancient, deadly curses. As she ran terrified into the night, Vlado watched with a cold, triumphant smile, believing his scheming had successfully halted the wedding. His plan was simple: have his own subordinate stage a kidnapping near the lake to keep her hidden away until the alliance crumbled. The ancient, malevolent forces of the lake were far too real, and they eagerly seized the vulnerable girl, tearing her soul apart. Screams of absolute horror echoed through the mansion as servants realized the young lady had been taken by the lake's evil spirits. Horror washed over Vlado as he realized his clever plot had backfired catastrophically, delivering his sister to a fate worse than death. Jurken's wrath was instantaneous, condemning his brother's reckless arrogance for unleashing a curse that could never be undone.
Sobbing in regret, Vlado begged for mercy, pleading that he never truly believed the terrifying legends of the lake were real.
But there was no time for tears. The possessed girl stood before them, a hollow vessel radiating pure, corrupted malice.
Ordering the servants to flee for their lives, Jurken stepped forward to face the monster wearing his sister's face. With a heavy heart, the patriarch drew his ancestral blade, knowing there was only one merciful way to end her torment. A cold steel gleamed under the pale moonlight as Jurken prepared to strike down his own flesh and blood to purify her soul. Confronting the monstrous entity, Jurken steadied his grip, choosing the path of agonizing duty over cowardly hesitation. A sickening spray of crimson painted the stone as Vlado's desperate screams echoed through the courtyard, his sister's life extinguished by his own brother's hand.
Back in the present, Vlado's forces aggressively sweep the dark woods, determined to finish what was started decades ago.
But as they approach the edge of Lake Amera, the dark waters begin to churn violently, awakening the restless dead resting in its depths. Screaming with unnatural hunger, a horrific horde of water ghouls erupts from the shallows, dragging themselves onto the muddy shore.
Panic erupts instantly among the rebel ranks as the legendary monsters of the lake tear into their formation, turning the hunters into prey.
Seething with rage, Vlado slashes furiously through the rotting corpses, his blade slicing clean through flesh and bone. But for every monster he fells, dozens more crawl out of the pitch-black water, suffocating the forest in a rancid stench of rot.
Gasping for breath, the traitorous uncle admits his terror, yet the burning desire for vengeance drives him deeper into the jaws of death.
From the center of the lake, a pair of colossal, glowing red eyes lock onto him, promising a violent end to any who dare trespass.
As the distant sounds of slaughter echo through the trees, Yevgen turns back to the portal one last time, knowing the true nightmare has only just begun. Realizing that the ultimate duty has now fallen upon him, Yevgen is urged by their allies to honor his father's final wishes and safeguard the sacred family heirlooms at all costs.
But the young heir fiercely rejects the idea of flight, declaring with absolute resolve that he will never abandon his dying father or his defenseless brother to the wolves.
Tolk's face pales with sheer dread as he warns that their treacherous uncle is already closing in, bringing the nightmare directly to their doorstep.
Listening under the pale moonlight, the legendary Snowguard sword hums with latent power, a reminder that their ancient heirloom was forged precisely for moments of absolute desperation. Locking eyes with his fading father, Yevgen stands tall, reminding the patriarch that if a father has his duties, a son has his own unbreakable path to walk. Turning back to his younger sibling, Yevgen seeks a silent, binding understanding, knowing that the choices they make tonight will alter their destinies forever.
Boris stares at his brother, utterly paralyzed by the sheer weight of the impending tragedy unfolding before his eyes.
In that brief, agonizing silence, memories of their ancestral home flood Boris's mind, recalling a time when the mystery of the family's secret legacy was kept behind locked doors. Yevgen offers a tragic, hauntingly beautiful smile, telling Boris that if they are destined to fall, it is far more glorious to die together on their own terms.
Barely clinging to life, the lord of the house wheezes his final command, ordering his sons to remain hidden until his own heart beats its very last.
Stealing his resolve, Yevgen whispers that when his own time comes to face the monster who ruined their lives, he will not take a single step backward.
The heavy silence of the cursed forest settles over him, his brilliant blue eyes burning with a cold, unstoppable determination.
Yet looking at those fierce eyes, Boris is suddenly reminded of his brother's once bright, innocent gaze from happier days, now forever shadowed by war.
Stepping into the oppressive gloom, the small group finally reaches the treacherous shores of Lake Emera, the dark waters whispering of ancient, unresolved horrors.
Weakly leaning against his loyal retainer, the patriarch breathes a sigh of grim satisfaction, knowing they have finally reached the ultimate stage of their tragic journey. Clinging to his last breath, the Lord prepares to pass the heavy burden of survival to his heir, his voice barely a rasp.
But beneath the surface of the churning lake, the restless skeletons of the condemned writhe in agony, a chilling reminder of Yenne's horrific, unholy descent decades ago.
Looking out over the cursed waters, Jurkin whispers his sister's name, the heavy guilt of his past actions weighing down on his shattered soul. Suddenly, a cruel, mocking voice echoes through the trees as the traitorous Uncle Vlado emerges from the shadows, sneering at the brother who left their sister to rot in a nameless grave. Vlado's eyes gleam with absolute madness as he taunts the dying lord, claiming their sister's restless spirit is eager to greet the brother who stabbed her through the heart. The bitter rivals lock eyes, their hatred boiling over as Jurkin condemns his brother's refusal to acknowledge his sins, while Vlado demands a bloody reckoning. Refusing to waste another second on words, the patriarch charges forward with a ferocious roar, knowing that the time for forgiveness has long since passed. Vlado's face contorts into a manic, bloodthirsty grin as he prepares to settle their age-old grudge, welcoming the violent end that awaits them both. Sparks fly as their blades collide in a deafening clash, the dying lord demanding to know if his brother is still blind to the horrific tragedy he caused. While the brothers trade blows, the loyal retainers unleash their powerful spells to hold back the encroaching water ghouls and the enemy's dark mages. Screaming in denial, Vlado swings his sword with lethal precision, furiously blaming the patriarch for their sister's ultimate demise. Jurkin barely manages to block the devastating blow, his weakened body buckling under the sheer force of Vlado's relentless assault. As Vlado screams that Jurkin was the true executioner of their sister's soul, memories of Yenne's terrified face flash before them, driving both men to fight with suicidal fury. With a final, desperate battle cry, Jurkin throws his remaining strength into his blade, determined to end their family's cursed legacy right then and there. Nearby, Yevgen stands guard over his trembling younger brother, his weapon raised as they are surrounded by the shrieking horde of the restless dead. Turning to Boris, Yevgen frantically mutters about the legend of the red-eyed spirit, questioning if his current power is truly enough to safeguard them both. Terror grips Boris's heart as he realizes a horrifying truth. The beast they slew earlier was merely a fraction of the lake's true, unspeakable nightmare. Cold sweat drips down Yevgen's face as the crushing reality of their situation sinks in, his confidence fracturing in the face of an unbeatable foe. His hand trembles violently against the hilt of Snowguard, the overwhelming pressure of their father's expectations threatening to shatter his resolve. He vividly recalls his father's final warning that the sacred heirlooms can only reach their true potential in the hands of a single surviving protector. Steeling his tiny heart, Boris realizes he cannot remain a helpless burden forever, resolving to stand tall and face the onslaught by his brother's side. With a trembling but determined grip on his own blade, the young boy vows to block the very first attack, refusing to let his brother face the darkness alone. Suddenly, a blinding flash of azure magic erupts from Yevgen's body, catching Boris completely off guard as a surging power fills the air. The legendary Snowguard resonates with Yevgen's desperate soul, unleashing a torrent of brilliant, crackling energy that envelops the young heir. As the sword's blinding light reaches a violent crescendo, a sudden, sickening tear in reality pulls Boris into a pitch-black abyss filled with a mocking, monstrous laugh. Plunging helplessly through a dark, crimson void, Boris screams as the horrific laughter of the evil spirit echoes all around him, threatening to swallow his soul. The mocking cackle grows louder, reverberating through his mind as the endless darkness threatens to consume his very existence. With a sharp, desperate gasp, Boris's eyes snap open as he violently tears himself away from the terrifying depths of the nightmare. Bolting upright, his heart pounding like a hammer, the young boy desperately clutches his chest, trying to shake off the lingering dread of the cursed lake. But as his eyes adjust, the dark, bloody woods are gone, replaced by a breathtaking, sun-drenched valley of vibrant green fields stretching beneath a peaceful blue sky. Squinting against the brilliant sunshine, Boris looks up to see a familiar figure waving warmly from the rolling hills in the distance. His heart leaps as Yevgen walks toward him with a gentle, carefree stride, holding a simple wooden bowl as if the nightmare of Lake Amera had never happened. Approaching with a bright, radiant smile, Yevgen chuckles softly, teasing his little brother for waking up with such a terrified look on his face.
Overcome by a sudden, desperate urge, Boris leaps forward and throws himself into his older brother's arms, knocking the wooden bowl away in a fierce embrace.
Clinging tightly to his brother's warm chest, Boris trembles in absolute confusion, trying to comprehend if their horrific ordeal at the lake was nothing but a terrible, realistic dream. The horrifying clash of blades and the memory of their father locked in a mortal feud with Uncle Vlado continues to haunt Boris, the trauma of that night refusing to let him go. But the chilling nightmare is abruptly shattered as his older brother, completely unbothered, calmly announces he must go fetch some fresh water. Confused and disoriented, Boris looks around the peaceful landscape, desperately trying to comprehend where they are and how they escaped the cursed lake. Spotting their horse grazing quietly nearby, his brother gently explains they fled the battle while Boris slept, sparking an immediate panic about their father's fate. The shattering revelation that the chaos scattered their forces leaves Boris desperate for a plan, yet Yefrnen insists they must remain calm. With a reassuring gesture, Yefrnen promises that the loyal butler will soon establish contact, though the heavy silence of the unknown hangs thick in the air. Staring into the distance, Yefrnen contemplates seeking refuge with their father's powerful ally, Elector Katsuya, though the journey ahead is fraught with peril. Boris listens in silence, the crushing weight of their fallen noble status and the bleak reality of their survival sinking deep into his young soul. Yefrnen sadly notes that the common folk, plagued by a bitter year, harbor a deep resentment for nobles, making their survival as fugitives almost impossible. Desperately clinging to hope, Boris prays that their father will reach them before the harsh world tears them apart. But the tense, dramatic silence is suddenly broken by a loud, protesting rumble from Boris's empty stomach, shattering the gloom. A rare, warm laugh escapes Yefrnen, a brief spark of innocence returning to his eyes as he resolves to find them a decent meal. Seeking shelter, they enter a raucous, crowded tavern where the rowdy laughter of commoners immediately puts them on high alert. The tavern keeper's gaze turns sharp and suspicious the moment the two wealthy-looking brothers step through the threshold. Standing before the counter, Yefrnen prepares to pay for a room, completely unaware of the dangerous target they are about to place on their backs. The landlady's eyes widen in sheer greed as Yefrnen casually drops a solid gold coin onto the worn counter, a fortune to these impoverished commoners. Instantly, predatory whispers spread through the dark corners of the bar, the rough patrons realizing these naive noble children are ripe for the picking. Handing over the key, the tavern keeper asks what they desire for dinner, to which Yefrnen simply requests whatever food is available, oblivious to the trap closing in. A sudden cold shiver runs down Boris's spine as he feels several pairs of hostile eyes locking onto them from the shadows. Looking back, the sheer malice in the room suffocates the young heir, confirming that they are no longer safe. Cruel, mocking laughter erupts from the tables as the patrons loudly belittle the delicate nobles, suggesting they belong in a nursery rather than a rough tavern. The ringleader sneers, his twisted face showing a clear intent to humiliate and break the young lords for his own sick amusement. With a heavy, mocking thud, a wooden bowl is slammed onto their table, the hostile gesture instantly freezing the blood in Boris's veins. The sneering man mockingly invites the young masters to enjoy their special feast, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Gagging in absolute horror, Boris covers his mouth as a vile, rancid stench hits his nose, threatening to make him vomit. Writhing and crawling in a disgusting puddle of sour milk, a swarm of live maggots fills the bowl, a vile, stomach-churning insult meant to degrade them. Terrified and repulsed, Boris recoils so violently that his chair crashes to the floor, his panic filling the tavern with delight. The mocking crowd roars with laughter, the ringleader tauntingly demanding to know why the delicate young master is refusing their local delicacy. Stepping forward with a wicked grin, the man offers to teach the helpless boy the proper way to force down the rancid meal. He heavily slaps a hand onto Yefrgen's shoulder, a fatal mistake that instantly shifts the energy in the room from mockery to cold dread. In a flash of blinding speed, Yefrgen's grip tightens around the man's wrist like a steel vice, his voice turning dead and freezing. Locking his piercing blue eyes onto the trembling thug, Yefrgen demands that the man show them how to eat it himself. Laughing nervously, the thug tries to play it off to his rowdy friends, desperately attempting to mask the sudden terror seizing his heart. But as the man tries to pull his hand away, Yefrgen's movement is absolute, giving his prey no avenue of escape.
With a deafening crash, Yevgen violently slams the thug's face straight into the wooden table, shattering the tavern's laughter into stunned silence. Standing tall over the dazed, bleeding man, Yevgen coldly warns the room that since they prepared this specialty, they must not hesitate to finish it. Terrifying dark aura envelops the young noble as he demands that the ringleader join him for a proper meal. Pinioned against the table, the arrogant bully screams in sheer panic, his bravado entirely evaporating in the face of absolute strength. Slowly raising a spoon overflowing with writhing, crawling maggots, Yevgen positions it right over the man's trembling lips. Terrified of what his brother might do, Boris frantically begs Yevgen to stop, desperate to prevent a bloodbath in the middle of hostile territory. Overwhelmed by fear, Boris screams his brother's name, pleading for him to show mercy before they cross a line of no return. Clutching the man's collar with effortless, terrifying strength, Yevgen pauses, the tense silence in the room stretched to a breaking point. With a look of cold disgust, Yevgen flips the spoon away, declaring that he is not cruel enough to waste his energy on force-feeding insects to a coward. Turning his back on the humiliated thug, Yevgen coldly commands Boris to follow him out, leaving the bruised bully grinding his teeth in vengeful fury. Seething with rage, the thug's allies draw their heavy wooden clubs, charging forward to bash the arrogant noble's skull in. Sensing the impending strike, Yevgen glances back, his expression entirely devoid of fear as the ambush begins. In a blur of perfect lethal movement, Yevgen unleashes a devastating strike, sending the first attacker crashing violently to the floor. As the remaining thugs surround him, Yevgen's hand instinctively hovers over the hilt of his glowing magical sword, calculating the cost of drawing his blade. Deciding that these cowards are not worthy of ancestral steel, his hand darts instead to a heavy wooden stool, ready to unleash a different kind of fury. With a brutal, bone-shattering swing, Yevgen prepares to obliterate the charging mob, proving that even without a sword, a cornered lion is still a predator. Before Yevgen can swing his makeshift weapon, the thugs swarm him from his blind spot, pinning his arms in a desperate bid to crush his defiance once and for all. A sharp gasp escapes Yevgen's throat as a familiar, high-pitched scream cuts through the tavern's roar, freezing the blood in his veins. He turns to see Boris in the clutches of the mob, the young boy's hair cruelly yanked back as they threaten to tear him apart if Yevgen moves another inch. The sadistic ringleader steps forward, his face contorted in a grotesque, mocking grin that promises nothing but agonizing humiliation for the fallen nobles. Forced to their knees by the sheer weight of the rough patrons, the brothers are completely cornered, their noble pride ground into the filthy tavern floor. Gritting his teeth until they bleed, Yevgen seethes with a quiet, lethal fury, cursing the pathetic cowards who can only fight through numbers and hostage-taking. The smug leader casually walks over, carrying the repulsive wooden bowl of squirming maggots, as if presenting a grand mock feast to their captives. Cold sweat pours down Boris's face as the sickening shadow of the ringleader looms over him, the repulsive odor of rancid waste filling his nose. With brutal, unyielding strength, the thug squeezes Boris's jaw open, determined to shove the writhing maggots down the terrified boy's throat. The sight of his little brother being tormented triggers a volcanic explosion of rage within Yevgen, his voice cracking as he demands they release the boy. Seeing Yevgen's desperate protective instinct, the ringleader's grin widens as he mockingly offers a sickening bargain. The older brother can eat it instead. Without a single shred of hesitation, Yevgen roars in defiance, demanding that they bring the vile bowl to him and leave his brother alone. Cruel, mocking laughter erupts from the onlookers, thoroughly amused by the rich kid's futile attempt to protect his family at the cost of his dignity. Stepping away from Boris, the ringleader approaches Yevgen, eager to watch a proud young lord crawl in the dirt and break under his cruel whim. He raises a spoonful of the crawling insects right to Yevgen's face, his eyes gleaming with a disgusting thirst for absolute dominance. With a low, threatening hiss, the thug warns Yevgen that if he flinches or refuses even a single bite, the entire bowl will be forced down Boris's throat. Looking directly into the eyes of his tormentor, Yevgen slowly opens his mouth, his icy blue gaze devoid of fear, radiating a silent promise of death.
Without a single flinch, Yevgen bites down hard, chewing the rancid, writhing mass with a terrifying composure that instantly freezes the tavern's mockery.
The sadistic smirk completely vanishes from the ringleader's face, replaced by a cold sweat as he realizes he is looking into the eyes of a monster. A heavy, suffocating silence falls over the rowdy thugs, their bravado evaporating as they witness a level of sheer resolve they can barely comprehend.
Boris watches in absolute heartbreak and horror, tears welling in his eyes as he witnesses the agonizing sacrifice his older brother just made to shield him.
With a slow, deliberate tilt of his chin, Yevgen swallows the vile mouthful, never once breaking his chilling, dead-eyed stare from the ringleader. Terrified by the chilling aura radiating from the young lord, the thug holding Yevgen's arm instinctively recoils, releasing his grip in pure panic. Trembling under the crushing weight of Yevgen's murderous gaze, the ringleader takes a frantic step back, feeling the sudden, suffocating shift in power. Wiping his mouth with cold indifference, Yevgen stands tall and issues an official, sacred challenge to a duel, his voice echoing like a death knell. Whispers of sheer panic ripple through the tavern, the realized gravity of challenging a true noble heir sending a wave of dread through the commoners. Towering over his prey, Yevgen coldly demands that the man speak his name, forcing the coward to face the consequences of his actions under noble law. His arrogance completely broken, the sweating ringleader stammers out his name, Gait Palone, feeling the sudden, icy grip of doom tightening around his neck. Stepping out into the open courtyard, Yevgen lays down the brutal terms of the duel, declaring that only absolute groveling submission will spare Gait's pathetic life. Pointing a deadly finger at the lingering evidence of their humiliation, Yevgen promises that Gait will consume every single maggot left in that bowl. Boris watches in stunned silence, realizing that his gentle older brother has completely vanished, replaced by a ruthless predator seeking absolute vengeance. With a voice like freezing iron, Yevgen commands Get to draw his steel, leaving no room for negotiation or escape. Suddenly, a brilliant, blinding light erupts from Yevgen's hand as the legendary Snowguard is unsheathed, radiating a divine power that illuminates the night. Gait's heart plunges into his stomach as he recognizes the mythical weapon, realizing with horror that he has crossed paths with the elite heirs of the Snowguard. Knowing that a prolonged battle is suicide, Gait lets out a panicked shriek and lunges forward, attempting a desperate preemptive strike to end it quickly. Steel crashes against steel in a violent explosion of sparks, but Yevgen blocks the strike effortlessly, his stance as immovable as a mountain. Grinding his teeth, Gait pushes with all his might, but Yevgen's physical strength is overwhelming, completely neutralizing the thug's desperate offense. With a seamless, lightning-fast deflection, Yevgen parries the blade aside, his counteroffensive beginning before Gait can even register the miss. Jit is thrown completely off balance, stumbling backward as Yevgen's wind-up promises a devastating final retribution. Unleashing a flawless, high-speed strike, Yevgen's blade cuts through the air like a streak of pure starlight. With a thunderous shockwave, the brilliant blade collides with Gait's defense, the sheer force of the blow driving the thug violently to his knees. A sickening metallic snap echoes through the courtyard as Yevgen effortlessly shears Gait's sword in half, leaving him completely defenseless. Staring in absolute shock at the broken hilt in his hands, Gait feels his entire reality shatter, his mind unable to process such monstrous strength. Gasps of terror arise from the tavern crowd as they witness their fearsome leader reduced to a trembling, broken mess in a matter of seconds. Collapsing face first into the dirt, Git's pride is utterly annihilated as he realizes the sheer, terrifying gap between a common thug and a true noble warrior. Raising the glowing, divine blade of his ancestors, Yevgen prepares to deliver the cold coup de grace, his eyes reflecting nothing but lifeless indifference. Screaming in absolute primal terror, Gait frantically begs for his life, groveling in the dirt as the glowing tip of the sword hovers inches from his neck. Trembling from head to toe, the pathetic bully loudly confesses his total, humiliating defeat, desperate to escape the icy embrace of death. Slowly lowering his sword but keeping his gaze razor sharp, Yevgen coldly demands that Git immediately fulfill the forfeit of their duel. Pointing the brilliant blade directly toward the repulsive wooden bowl on the ground, Yevgen delivers his final, crushing command. Eat!
Trembling violently, the defeated Gait Palone has no choice but to open his mouth as the disgusting, maggot-filled spoon is shoved past his lips.
Choked sobs and violent gagging echo through the tavern as the vile insects are forced down his throat, Gait thrashing in pure, agonizing disgust on the floor. With a final explosive heave, the humiliated bully retches violently, knocking the wooden bowl aside as he collapses in a pool of his own shattered pride. Boris stands frozen, a cold chill running down his spine as he witnesses the sickening, ruthless aftermath of his brother's unyielding justice.
Without sparing another glance at the broken man, Yevgen sheathes his ancestral blade and calmly exits the tavern, leaving a suffocating silence in his wake. Later that night, in the quiet safety of their dark room, Boris sits huddled on the edge of the bed, the heavy weight of the day's horrors pressing down on him. Staring blankly into the shadows, the young boy is haunted by the terrifying transformation he witnessed in his once gentle older brother.
Sensing his little brother's deep distress, Yevgen quietly approaches, his voice soft but carrying a strange, heavy gravity that feels entirely new.
Trembling, Boris whispers his relief that they survived, desperately trying to convince himself that Yevgen only did what was necessary to save them. The unsettling feeling refuses to fade. The boy confesses that Yevgen seemed like an entirely different, cold-blooded person in the heat of that brutal conflict.
Clutching his arms tightly, Boris admits that even if their father would have praised such ruthless resolve, he cannot help but feel terrified of what they are becoming.
A soft, melancholy smile touches Yevgen's lips as he acknowledges that nobody in the world understands him as deeply as his little brother.
Sitting beside Boris on the bed, Yevgen quietly admits that he has finally come to understand the harsh, unforgiving truths of the world their father warned them about. Turning his back to hide the pain in his eyes, Yevgen delivers a chilling warning, telling Boris that mercy is a dangerous luxury they can no longer afford. With their family fallen and hostile forces closing in from all sides, Yevgen reveals the heartbreaking truth. He cannot protect Boris forever. Looking back at his brother, Yevgen implores Boris to harden his heart and find the strength to survive on his own.
Grabbing the boy's hand with desperate urgency, Yevgen urges him to shield his vulnerabilities, to lock away his emotions so the cruel world cannot break him.
He commands Boris to understand this brutal lesson immediately, the cold steel of the legendary sword leaning against the wall like a silent witness to their shattered youth.
Squeezing his brother's hand until it hurts, Yevgen whispers a terrifying truth. The world will never show mercy, and it will never leave them in peace.
Staring up in stunned silence, Boris is deeply shaken, realizing the profound desperation behind his brother's sudden, cold transformation.
He understands that Yevgen is only acting this way out of absolute terror, terrified of failing to protect the only family he has left in this cruel world.
Gently patting Boris's head, Yevgen restores a brief moment of familiar warmth before the suffocating darkness of the night settles over them once more. As the cold moonlight pours through the window, Boris lies awake in the silent room, his mind racing with fear and uncertainty about their future.
Sitting on the floor with his magical blade resting in his lap, Yevgen stands vigilant guard, a silent protector keeping the nightmares of the world at bay.
Suddenly, a faint, trembling sound cuts through the silence, causing Boris to snap his eyes open as a heavy realization dawns on him.
In the dim light, a single glistening droplet falls from above, shattering the quiet of the room.
Boris turns his head and freezes in absolute shock. The older brother, who seemed like an invincible, cold-blooded warrior, is trembling in the dark. Sitting up slowly, Boris watches in heartbreaking silence as Yevgen weeps, his shoulders shaking under the unbearable, suffocating weight of his responsibilities. The young boy's heart breaks for his brother, but he holds back his words, knowing that Yevgen's proud spirit would shatter if he knew his weakness was seen. Forcing himself to lie back down, Boris pretends to sleep, the agonizing sound of Yevgen's quiet, muffled tears echoing in his ears. Clenching his fists under the blanket, Boris lets his own silent tears flow, sharing the crushing grief and terror of their uncertain, dangerous path.
By morning, the tears are gone as the brothers resume their desperate journey, riding through the vast open wilderness under a deceptively bright sky. Leading their horse on foot, Yevgen's face is a mask of stoic indifference once again, the vulnerability of the night completely locked away. Watching his brother's rigid back from atop the horse, Boris desperately searches for a way to break the painful, suffocating silence between them.
Pointing toward a patch of vibrant purple wildflowers, Boris softly asks for their name, hoping to revive a trace of the gentle brother he used to know.
Yevgen answers with a single, cold word, cornflower, shattering Boris's hopes as he remembers how his brother used to tell him beautiful stories about every flower they passed. Suddenly, the horse halts in its tracks, its ears twitching as the quiet rustle of the surrounding brush signals an unsettling presence.
As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a bloody red glow across the sky, Yevgen grimly notes that they have lost their way and must camp in the wild.
Under the dark canopy of the forest, they light a small campfire, the flickering embers doing little to pierce the oppressive gloom surrounding them. Clutching his sheath tightly, Boris sits in tense silence, his instincts screaming that they are no longer alone in these shadowed woods. With a deliberate movement, Yevgen drops his stirring stick into the dirt, whispering his brother's name as he senses the invisible trap closing in.
His icy gaze narrows, the gentle brother entirely gone as his senses lock onto the hidden predators lurking in the dark.
Standing tall, Yevgen draws his legendary blade, his voice ringing with cold disdain as he challenges the cowards hiding in the shadows to show themselves.
Instantly, a massive group of heavily armed thugs burst from the tree line, brandishing axes and chains as they completely surround the campsite.
Terror strikes Boris's heart as their panicked horse breaks free and bolts into the darkness, leaving them entirely cut off and isolated.
Yevgen glances at the familiar face among the attackers, mockingly noting that the defeated Gait Polon has brought a small army to salvage his broken pride. A towering, battle-scarred thug steps forward, laughing mockingly as he pushes Gait aside, revealing that they did not come to rescue a pathetic loser. The new leader's greedy eyes lock onto Yevgen's sword, revealing their true, sinister goal. They are here to steal the legendary Winterer at any cost. Yevgen realizes with bitter regret that revealing his noble lineage in the tavern has painted a massive target on their backs, drawing greedy wolves to their ancestral steel. With a bloodthirsty roar, the thug leader orders his men to charge, sending a wave of armed killers rushing forward to butcher the brothers and claim their legendary blade. The bloodthirsty mob charges forward, weapons bared, to overwhelm Yevgen with sheer numbers. With blinding speed, Yevgen's blade flashes, deflecting their frantic strikes with flawless precision. Shifting his weight to anchor his footing, Yevgen locks his cold, unwavering gaze onto the next wave of attackers. A violent arc of starlight slashes through the air, sending the charging thugs flying backward in agonizing defeat. Yet, as the fallen grovel in the dirt, another battle-hardened mercenary steps forward with a mocking, confident sneer. Screaming a blood-curdling battle cry, the brutish warrior lunges forward, determined to break Yevgen's perfect guard. As Yevgen prepares to counter, Boris's panicked warning pierces the chaos, signaling a deadly, unseen threat. Out of the shadows, a heavy, spiked chain whips through the air with murderous, bone-crushing velocity. With a harsh, metallic rattle, the heavy iron links wrap tightly around the glowing blade of the Winterer, locking it in place. The cunning mercenary laughs triumphantly, believing he has completely neutralized the legendary sword's divine power. Yevgen remains utterly calm, releasing a suffocating wave of glacial energy that freezes the very air around them. With a thunderous freezing crack, the iron chain shatters into 1,000 harmless frozen shards. The mercenaries gasp in absolute horror, their minds unable to comprehend the mystical, unnatural display. They are about to learn the terrifying secret of the Winterer, the legendary ability to freeze and shatter any material it touches. Standing amidst the freezing mist, Yevgen radiates an aura of absolute death, his blade ready to claim the remaining souls. But the enemy is ruthless. A towering thug looms behind Boris, threatening to butcher the helpless boy to break Yevgen's resolve. Panic finally pierces Yevgen's icy composure as he realizes the enemy has slipped past his guard to target his most vulnerable weakness.
Sweating in desperation, Yevgen's mind races, realizing they are completely exposed and he cannot protect Boris while surrounded.
The giant brute prepares to swing, mocking the young boy as if his brief, tragic life is already at its end. The mercenary crew laughs cruelly, fully expecting the defenseless child to beg and weep for his life. But Boris's eyes flare with sudden, fierce determination, drawing his dagger as he declares he will not die a coward's death.
Enraged by the boy's defiance, the massive thug swings his heavy axe downward to cleave him in two.
Time seems to slow to a torturous crawl as the shadow of death looms directly over Boris. Yevgen screams in pure, agonizing terror, desperately lunging forward but knowing he is too far away to stop the blow.
The executioner's face twists with sadistic glee as he brings the heavy axe down, but a sudden whistling sound cuts through the wind.
A heavy iron arrow pierces the brute's neck with brutal, unerring precision, stopping his deadly strike instantly.
Blood splatters across the dirt as the giant's eyes roll back, his lethal momentum completely halted.
The massive warrior crashes heavily to the ground, leaving Boris trembling but miraculously unharmed.
The surviving thugs freeze in utter confusion, frantically searching the darkened tree line for the source of the lethal projectile.
Suddenly, a lethal rain of arrows erupts from the forest, ruthlessly cutting down the remaining mercenaries in a matter of seconds.
Rushing forward, Yevgen pulls his trembling brother into a protective embrace, his eyes scanning the dark canopy for this new threat. From the thick, shadowy brush, heavy footsteps approach as a mysterious voice praises their desperate, chaotic struggle.
4 heavily cloaked figures emerge from the darkness, their hidden faces immediately putting Yevgen on high alert.
Lowering his hood, a charismatic red-haired traveler smiles warmly, claiming they are merely friendly saviors in these hostile lands.
Yevgen remains deeply suspicious, offering cold gratitude only if they expect absolutely nothing in return.
The leader laughs heartily at the boys' wariness, mockingly pointing out that they have nothing of value to offer anyway.
Watching them closely, Yevgen feels a cold sweat break out, knowing these travelers eliminated a small army in the blink of an eye.
As the strangers casually gather around their campfire, Yevgen struggles to decide if they are powerful allies or far more dangerous enemies. Reluctantly lowering his blade, Yevgen sits with his brother, thanking the skilled strangers for saving their lives.
2 of the men introduce themselves as Wills Camv and Joaquin, their relaxed demeanor betraying none of their deadly capability.
The third traveler reveals himself as Romavac, a deadly marksman famously known across the lands as the Bolt.
Finally, the charismatic leader introduces himself as Janaka Goth, his sharp eyes holding an unnerving level of curiosity.
When asked for his own name, Yevgen hesitates, the weight of his fallen noble lineage forcing him to keep his identity hidden.
Sensing the heavy tension, Romavac shrugs and offers to leave if the brothers are uncomfortable sharing their camp. Realizing they cannot survive the brutal night alone, Yevgen quickly relents and invites them to rest by the warm hearth.
With a sudden, swift motion, Janaka tosses a bright red apple across the fire straight toward Boris.
Catching the fruit in his hands, Boris stares in quiet wonder at the unexpected gesture of kindness.
Janaka chuckles, assuring the cautious boy that the food isn't poisoned and praising his sharp survivalist instincts.
Taking a hesitant bite of the sweet fruit, Boris listens as Janaka notes how unusually young he is to survive in these deadly wastelands. Janaka reveals that they are mercenaries wandering from land to land for coin, raising a chilling question. Who paid them to be here tonight? The traveler's sharp question cuts through the crackling heat of the campfire, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly whisper as he asks Yevgen if he has ever heard of the legendary cursed realm known only as the Mortal Land.
Yevgen's breath hitches at the name, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck as Janaka casually puffs on his pipe, confirming with a grim nod that this graveyard of kings is very real.
Janaka weaves a haunting tale of Ganapali, the ancient kingdom of magic that was once so rich and majestic that gold and jewels lined every street before war reduced it to ash and ruin.
Where a glorious civilization once stood, only a burning, hellish wasteland remains, haunted by the vengeful, restless spirits of the dead who refuse to leave.
Looking directly at the brothers, Janaka delivers a chilling truth. The Mortal Land is a place of absolute doom, where travelers walk in alive and are destined to return only as corpses.
Under the vast, empty night sky, the silence around the campfire grows suffocating as the weight of the mercenaries' terrifying warning settles heavily over the group.
Noticing the boy's wide-eyed horror, Janaka chuckles softly, leaning forward to ask if his dark tale of the cursed land has conjured too many nightmares in their young minds. Yevgen tries to maintain his stoic mask, but his voice trembles slightly as he confesses how unbelievable it is that Janaka and his crew managed to escape such an inescapable hellhole alive.
Suddenly, Romavac brandishes a lethally sharp, glowing purple bolt, warning Boris that even a single touch of its deadly phantom poison is strong enough to obliterate a ghost.
Standing up abruptly, Janaka commands Romavac to stop his grim teasing, admitting that they never actually reached the heart of the legendary kingdom of Ganapoli.
Walking casually around the fire, Janaka reveals they merely scavenged the outer borders, stripping valuable relics from the very spirits that haunt the wastes. With a cunning grin, the charismatic mercenary leader pulls a gleaming, ancient golden artifact from his cloak, offering to show the boys a glimpse of true, forbidden history. Before Boris can react, Janaka flips the heavy gold ring through the air, sending it flying straight into the young boy's startled hands.
Catching the artifact, Boris's eyes widen as he gazes at the masterfully carved figures of people dancing in eternal celebration along its golden surface.
In an instant, the shimmering metal pulls Boris's mind into a vivid, breathtaking vision of the lost Golden City, where joy and prosperity reigned supreme. Glittering illusion sweeps over his senses, painting a picture of dancing ribbons and glowing sand that sparkles like a million stars under a celestial sky. Boris sees towering golden pillars and a ruby-encrusted ceiling bathed in brilliant sunlight, realizing the sheer, tragic beauty of a paradise lost to time. As dawn finally breaks over a massive, secluded inn, the illusions of the night fade, replaced by the cold, exhaustion-filled reality of the morning. Exhausted and on high alert, the brothers follow the mercenaries through the heavy wooden doors of the inn, their muscles aching from a long, sleepless night of marching. The innkeeper greets the travelers with curiosity, noting how deeply haggard they look, only for Janaka to laugh off their exhaustion as a minor setback in the woods. Standing quietly behind his brother, Boris remembers the horrifying piles of mercenary corpses left in the dark woods, grateful that Yevgen chose to push through the night rather than sleep near death. Janaka kindly gestures toward the stairs, suggesting that the brothers take a room and get some well-deserved rest after their harrowing ordeal. Handed a brass key, Yevgen's icy suspicion softens for a fraction of a second as he quietly thanks the mercenary leader for his unexpected generosity. As the other mercenaries stretch lazily and head upstairs, Boris watches their retreating backs, finally feeling a fleeting sense of safety. Rubbing his tired eyes, Boris weakly whispers to his brother that he's too exhausted to stand, his body finally collapsing under the weight of the stress. Smiling with genuine warmth for the first time in days, Yevgen reassures his brother that they can finally let their guard down and sleep. Falling into a deep slumber, Boris's mind drifts into a distant, sunlit memory of his childhood, where his name was called out in a warm, familiar garden. Turning around with innocent curiosity, the young Boris looks up, expecting a friendly face to greet him. Instead, a tall man in a fine green coat stands before him, his handsome face carrying an unsettling, predatory smile. The man introduces himself as Boris's uncle, his honeyed words masking a deep, sinister intent as he asks if the boy is playing all alone. Stepping closer, the uncle mockingly asks if Boris wants to see what real fun is, his eyes glinting with a dark, twisted amusement. Snatched into the air, the young Boris squeals with innocent delight, completely unaware of the monstrous trap closing around him. The boy's joyous laughter rings through the garden, a pure sound of childhood bliss before the nightmare begins. Suddenly, the uncle's expression twists into a terrifying, sadistic grin as he whispers that this is a day the boy will never, ever forget. Dragged deep into the shadowed woods, the innocent game vanishes, replaced by the grim stone edge of a deep, forgotten well. Terror floods young Boris's chest as he looks up at his uncle's cold, merciless eyes, realizing that something is horribly wrong. Dangling helplessly over the pitch-black abyss, Boris screams in absolute panic, begging his uncle to pull him back from the jaws of death. But the uncle only laughs, a demonic, manic expression of pure malice framing his face as he prepares to drop the boy into the dark.
With a blood-curdling shriek, Boris jolts awake, his heart hammering against his ribs as the phantom terror of his nightmare shatters his sleep. But as he tries to sit up, a cold dread paralyzes him. His wrists are bound tightly behind his back, locking him in place. Through the dim light of the locked room, Yevgen's voice pierces the silence, revealing that he, too, is bound hand and foot in this trap.
With a hollow, devastated look, Yevgen delivers the ultimate crushing blow. The legendary blade, Winterer, is completely gone. Horrified, Boris's voice cracks as he demands to know how they could have been betrayed and who could have stolen their family's sacred steel. Instead of panicking, Yevgen suddenly bursts into a low, bitter chuckle that quickly escalates into manic, self-deprecating laughter. Mocking their own pathetic helplessness, Yevgen laughs at the cruel irony of their survival, completely broken by his own foolish naivete. Staring at his frightened younger brother, Yevgen's laughter fades as he bitterly admits that, despite his pride, he is still just a foolish, ignorant child. But a cold, unyielding fire ignites in Yevgen's eyes as he declares that since their father is gone, he will teach Boris the harsh, brutal rules of this world himself. A terrifying aura of absolute bloodlust radiates from Yevgen as he commands Boris to stand, ready to unleash holy hell and pay back their betrayers tenfold. Suddenly, a brutal, bone-shattering strike echoes from outside the locked shed, signaling that the hunt has officially begun. A mercenary guard crashes violently to the floor, his sword clattering away as the brothers break their bonds and initiate their ruthless, blood-soaked vengeance. Standing tall over the beaten guard, Yevgen's voice drops to a chilling whisper as he demands to know the mastermind behind their chains, his patience already worn paper-thin. Groaning in agony, the defeated guard spits blood and desperately protests his innocence, completely shocked by the terrifying strength of a youth he was told was helpless. The man clenches his fists in bitter regret, cursing the day he got involved with a ruthless crew who held his own life hostage as leverage. Yevgen's eyes narrow to deadly slits, his grip tightening on his newly acquired dagger as he demands the exact identity of those treacherous cowards. A single terrified name escapes the guard's lips, sending a cold jolt of absolute fury straight through Yevgen's veins. The charismatic leader who shared their fire had stabbed them in the back. The horrific truth unfolds as the guard confesses that they were sold like cattle to a notorious mercenary horde, destined to be used as disposable pawns until they drew their very last breaths. The guard pleads with them to run, warning the brothers that the bloodthirsty slave mercenaries are already on their way to collect their new prize. Refusing to flee like prey, Yevgen protectively shields his trembling younger brother, his voice turning deadly as he demands the location of the traitors. Realizing he is dealing with a predator far more terrifying than any mercenary, the guard quickly leaks the name of Helmer's Tavern, revealing the cutthroats always operate under the shroud of darkness. A dark, suffocating aura of bloodlust erupts around Yevgen as he turns to his brother, declaring that they have no time to waste if they want to reclaim their legacy. Standing beneath the quiet, dawn-lit skies of the secluded inn, the brothers prepare to step into the mouth of the beast, knowing there is no turning back from the path of vengeance. Grabbing Boris by the shoulders, Yevgen commands him to hide in the shadows and watch everything that is about to transpire, preparing him for the harsh reality of blood and steel. With a heart full of dread, Boris watches his older brothers retreating back as Yevgen marches toward the heavy wooden doors, ready to unleash a nightmare upon their betrayers. Steeling his resolve, Yevgen accepts that he must become a monster today, determined to show Boris the brutal price of betrayal so that his brother may survive this unforgiving world. A fleeting moment of sorrow washes over Yevgen's face as he wishes he could preserve Boris's childhood innocence, but the cruel world has stolen that luxury from them forever. The wooden door creaks open with a slow, agonizing groan, marking the arrival of a silent, grim reaper ready to collect his blood debt. Inside the rowdy, dimly lit tavern, oblivious patrons drink and gossip about the violent destruction of noble houses, entirely unaware that a new storm of violence has just stepped inside. Spotting the arrogant mercenaries laughing at their easy victory, Yevgen notices that only 2 of their betrayers are present, the absence of their leader only fueling his burning wrath. Blending seamlessly into the chaotic crowd, Yevgen quietly picks up a wooden serving tray, his hand stealthily resting on the hilt of his concealed dagger.
Step by step, Yevgen glides through the shadows of the tavern, closing the distance toward his prey with the silent, lethal grace of a stalking panther. Standing directly behind the unsuspecting mercenary, Yevgen speaks in a calm, deceptively polite tone that immediately causes the cutthroat to freeze in confusion.
The mercenaries trade puzzled glances, their drunken minds struggling to comprehend which of them had summoned a server they didn't recognize.
Holding the tray high to conceal his weapon, Yevgen whispers a false message about a mysterious lady waiting outside, laying the perfect trap to separate his targets.
Squinting in suspicion, the mercenary mutters that their cohort was supposed to meet them at the village entrance, his instincts finally screaming that something is terribly wrong.
A chilling realization begins to dawn on the cutthroat as he stares up at the mysterious youth, his drunken haze instantly vanishing in the face of sudden danger. Lowering the tray, Yevgen reveals his face, his eyes glowing with an unholy, icy blue glare that paralyzes the mercenaries with absolute soul-crushing terror.
Before they can even draw a breath, Yevgen smashes the heavy wooden tray violently across the mercenary's jaw, shattering his teeth in a brutal, explosive strike. In a flash of blinding silver, Yevgen's dagger arcs downward, driving deep through Joaquin's hand and pinning it ruthlessly to the heavy wooden table in a sickening spray of blood. A blood-curdling scream of pure agony echoes through the tavern as Joaquin thrashes helplessly, his hand impaled and locked to the table by the agonizing steel.
Leaping back in utter shock, Will's Camp draws his blade, his voice shaking with terror as he demands to know the identity of the vengeful demon standing before him. With a chillingly calm demeanor, Yevgen looms over his pinned prey, asking if the searing pain of cold steel has finally sobered up his treacherous mind. Pointing his blade directly at his target, Yevgen delivers a simple, terrifying ultimatum. He wants the sacred family sword back, and he wants it now.
Roaring in desperate defiance, Will's Camp lunges forward with a vicious slash, hoping to cleave his young attacker in two. Sidestepping the clumsy strike with ease, Yevgen unleashes a devastating counterswing, his voice thundering with absolute, uncompromising authority.
The clash of their swords rings out like a death knell as Will's Camp desperately blocks the blow, spitting out a weak refusal to save his own skin.
With overwhelming brute force, Yevgen shatters the mercenary's defense, his blade slicing through the air and sending the terrified warrior crashing hard to the tavern floor.
Gasps of pure horror escape the fallen mercenary as he looks up, realizing he is completely outmatched by the sheer, inhuman speed of his opponent.
Staring down with eyes completely devoid of mercy, Yevgen raises his sword, prepared to dye the floorboards red to get the answers he seeks.
Pressing the freezing edge of his sword directly against Will's Camp's throat, Yevgen calmly threatens to sever his hand if he delays his confession by even a single second.
Swallowing hard against the sharp metal, the mercenary trembles in absolute submission, knowing that any lie will result in immediate, bloody death.
Grimacing from the unbearable pain, Joaquin watches the steel of the dagger twitch, his resistance entirely shattered by the agonizing torment. With another sickening twist of the blade, the tavern fills with Joaquin's desperate, high-pitched shrieks as his flesh is carved apart. Gasping and choking on his own breath, the broken mercenary finally surrenders, ready to betray his own allies just to make the unimaginable torture stop. The traitor gasps out that the woman and Romovac have taken the sacred blade to sell it for themselves, prompting Will's Camp to yell a desperate warning that their leader will execute them for this betrayal.
Sensing the shifting tide of the battle, Will's Camp desperately swings his sword one last time to create a distraction, scrambling backward in a frantic bid for survival. Bolting through the open door, the fleeing mercenary screams a final desperate threat that the deadly Black Gloves Guild will track the brothers down and claim their heads.
Yevgen curses under his breath, realizing that the escape of a witness has just blown their cover and invited a whole army of killers to their doorstep.
Grabbing the pinned traitor by the hair, Yevgen demands to know where the rest of the gang plans to secure the transaction before the trail goes completely cold. Joaquin frantically explains that Romovac's reliance on his deadly crossbow forced the conspirators to divide the spoils quickly to avoid drawing Janaka's suspicious eye.
Spilling the final crucial detail, the bleeding traitor reveals that the transaction is taking place at the north entrance of the village at midnight, igniting a race against time that will either reclaim the legendary Winterer or seal the brothers' doom. Sweat beads on the traitor's brow as the cold blade bites into his throat, his trembling voice gasping out a final, terrifying warning that the woman they seek is a lethal viper who will stop at nothing to destroy them.
With a sickening thud, Yevgen slams his pommel down, instantly silencing the mercenary's pleas and knocking him senseless to the blood-stained floor.
Icy blue eyes burn with an unyielding flame of hatred, Yevgen's grip tightening on his weapon as he prepares to venture into the dark night to reclaim what was stolen. Underneath the pale, indifferent glow of the full moon, the quiet village sleeps, entirely unaware of the storm of violence brewing in its shadowed streets.
Marching through the shadows with silent, lethal intent, Yevgen leads the way, his heart cold as stone and his mind locked onto a single, blood-soaked goal.
Behind him, Boris struggles to keep pace, his wide, terrified eyes reflecting the crushing weight of the brutal path his brother has forced them onto.
Stopping in his tracks, Yevgen stares at his bloodied hands, a bitter, soul-crushing realization washing over him as he whispers how terribly foul the taste of vengeance truly is.
Turning to face his trembling younger brother, Yevgen raises his blood-slicked weapon, ready to lay bare the horrific truth of the monster he is becoming. With a chillingly calm voice, Yevgen holds up his stained hand, declaring that the act of taking a human life is no longer a distant nightmare, but a simple reality he is fully capable of executing.
Letting the heavy blade slip from his bloodied fingers to clatter against the dirt, he coldly reveals that the blood of their enemies is now on his hands, proving he can slaughter just like their father did.
Despair floods Boris's face as he desperately pleads with his brother, refusing to believe that the caring protector he looked up to has truly transformed into a cold-blooded killer.
In a sudden flash of agonizing memory, Boris clutches his face and weeps, realizing that this horrific transformation was born out of Yevgen's desperate desire to keep him safe from harm.
Standing tall in the moonlight, Yevgen looks down at his brother, declaring that when there is someone precious to protect, a man must be willing to commit any sin, even cold-blooded murder.
Boris looks up with tears in his eyes, pleading with Yevgen to value his own life as well, terrified that his brother will completely destroy himself in this pursuit of vengeance.
Yevgen's icy gaze softens for a brief moment as he delivers a brutal lesson. Just as he is willing to do anything to protect Boris, Boris must learn to do whatever it takes to survive for his own sake.
He commands his younger brother to prioritize his own survival above all else, warning him that even their legendary family heirloom is worthless compared to his own life.
Before them, the gruesome horrors of a merciless world flash in their minds, the screaming soldiers, the chaotic battlefield where the weak are slaughtered without hesitation.
The terrifying visions of rot, betrayal, and sickness loom large, a grim reminder of what awaits them if they dare to show even a single moment of weakness.
Gripping Boris's shoulders with fierce, unyielding intensity, Yevgen seals their silent pact, anchoring his brother to the harsh reality of their survival.
With a quiet, heavy command that echoes in the night air, Yevgen demands that Boris survive until the very end, no matter what dark sins they must commit to get there.
Deep in the secluded outskirts of the village, two hooded conspirators whisper in the dark, waiting anxiously to finalize their treacherous deal.
Their tension spikes as one of them mutters in frustration, scanning the empty path for any sign of the legendary sword that was supposed to seal their fortune. Suddenly, heavy footsteps rattle the ground as a brutal brigade of war-torn mercenaries emerges from the gloom, their sheer presence radiating absolute dread. Leading the bloodthirsty horde is Commander Duraki, a colossal, battle-scarred warrior whose cruel gaze immediately locks on to the trembling conspirators. Forcing a deceptive, sycophantic smile, the female traitor steps forward, bowing mockingly to welcome the infamous commander of the Golden Spearblade. Duraki's voice rumbles with deadly menace as he demands immediate compensation, revealing that the helpless noble youths they sold him have already escaped his grasp. Unfazed by his terrifying aura, the woman sneers, mockingly pointing out that it is his own incompetence that allowed their prey to slip away. Duraki's face darkens with murderous rage as he delivers a chilling ultimatum. Either they pay back double the price right now, or they will suffer a fate worse than death.
With a cruel grin, the commander commands them to join his brutal corps as disposable slaves, forcing them to pay off their debt with their own blood.
Outraged by the sudden extortion, the woman screams in defiance, realizing they have been completely backed into a corner by a monster who refuses to negotiate.
Her partner desperately tries to de-escalate the situation, offering to pay for the lost damages while subtly trying to preserve their fragile alliance. He weakly argues that their lack of combat synergy would only hinder the elite mercenary corps, begging the ruthless warlord to accept a refund instead.
With a sharp curse, the woman hurls a heavy pouch of coins to the ground, trying to buy their freedom from the clutches of these greedy savages.
Stepping forward with a towering, murderous presence, Duraki cold-bloodedly warns them that if they refuse to submit, he will happily paint the dirt red with their blood.
Panic finally shatters their composure as the male conspirator desperately whispers to his partner, realizing the mercenaries have no intention of letting them leave alive. Seizing a final, desperate gamble, the woman steps forward, trying to negotiate the brutal terms of their forced servitude.
Her partner looks at her in absolute horror, realizing she is actually contemplating signing their lives away to these ruthless butchers.
She demands to know if their enslavement is truly permanent, desperately searching for any loophole that might grant them a sliver of freedom.
Duraki scoffs, promising to release them only if they successfully complete a deadly upcoming mission to fill a contract for 50 expendable soldiers.
Intrigued by the offer, the treacherous woman smiles greedily as she throws back her cloak, revealing the brilliant, glowing blue hilt of the stolen Winterer resting on her back.
Watching from the shadows above, Yevgen's eyes suddenly widened in absolute shock as he recognizes the unmistakable radiating power of his father's sacred sword.
Confident that her newly acquired weapon will guarantee their survival, the woman greedily accepts the deadly deal, sealing her own doom.
But a furious, thunderous command shatters the quiet night, halting the mercenaries in their tracks as a vengeful figure stands poised on the roof above.
With a heavy, dust-kicking crash, Yevgen drops down from the roof, his boots slamming into the dirt with the weight of an oncoming storm.
Caught completely off guard, the massive mercenary commander spins around, his scarred face twisting in sheer disbelief at the intruder's audacity. The treacherous woman gasps in utter shock, her arrogant grin instantly vanishing as she realizes the prey she sold out has returned to claim her head.
Drawing his sword with blinding speed, Yevgen charges forward like a wild beast, his boots kicking up dust as he lunges straight toward the traitors.
Pointing his blade directly at the shivering woman, Yevgen's voice drops to a chilling, murderous whisper as he demands the immediate return of his family legacy.
With his trembling brother watching from the shadows, Yevgen stands his ground against the entire mercenary army, locking his deadly gaze onto his target.
Suffocating aura of pure, unadulterated bloodlust erupts from Yevgen, his eyes glowing with a terrifying promise of total, absolute slaughter.
The treacherous woman sneers in delight as Yevgen reveals himself, her mock laughter echoing in the cold night as she realizes her prey has walked straight into her trap.
With her bargain seemingly complete, she turns to the massive mercenary commander, eager to wash her hands of the blood and flee with her stolen fortune before the situation turns deadly.
But Yevgen stands tall, leveling his blade at her throat as he furiously questions how they dare trade in human lives in a land where slavery is a sin.
Unfazed by his righteous fury, the vicious woman mockingly retorts that weaklings have no rights, sneering that a mere rookie has no business lecturing real killers on the laws of survival.
Yevgen's blood runs hot as his grip tightens on his weapon, his pride stung and his determination hardening into a lethal, quiet fury.
Refusing to be intimidated, Yevgen steps forward with unyielding courage, pointing his blade directly at her chest and declaring that she is nothing but a cowardly thief.
From the shadows, Boris's voice cracks with raw outrage as he exposes their absolute cowardice, screaming that ambushing sleeping children is not talent, but the acts of pathetic rats.
The heavy silence of the night is shattered as the brothers stand united against their betrayers, demanding to know if they truly feel pride in such dirty, dishonorable schemes. The hooded conspirator tries to brush off their anger with a dismissive chuckle, mockingly comparing the brothers to wealthy children playing at being soldiers before they lose everything.
Memories of their false kindness flash through their minds, the deceptive warmth of a shared campfire, a poison-laden apple, and the glittering magic ring used to drug them into submission.
Boris's chest heaves with profound disgust as the realization of their complete and utter betrayal sinks in, his young heart hardening against these monsters.
Shaking with rage, the boy screams that they are not warriors, but disgusting scammers who completely destroyed the sacred bond of trust.
Treacherous conspirators flinch in absolute shock, their faces twisting in fury that a mere child would dare to strip away their pride in front of the entire mercenary army.
The atmosphere shifts instantly as Commander Daraki lets out a low, rumbling hum, his cold eyes gleaming with a sudden, sadistic amusement that makes the woman's smile freeze in her throat. Panic begins to choke the treacherous woman as she desperately tries to salvage her payout and flee, but Daraki's booming voice cuts her off with a terrifying command. They must fight again. Daraki lays out his brutal terms, declaring that the winners will walk away free, but the losers will be enslaved and sold to cover the debt of their failed deal. He raises his massive spear, cementing his terrifying ultimatum that those who fall in this duel will be dragged away in chains, leaving no room for escape. As the winter wind howls through the trees, the stage is set for a horrific duel of survival, where the fate of the legendary sword and the brothers' lives hang by a single thread. Under the cold starlight, Yevgen stands face to face with the deadly viper who betrayed them, the tension between them stretched to a snapping point. With an icy focus in his eyes, Yevgen demands she unsheath her weapon, ready to unleash the full force of his desperate, burning vengeance. The woman sneers confidently, boasting that she will easily slaughter a pathetic rookie, her fingers eagerly reaching toward her blade. But she hesitates, a sudden wave of greed washing over her as she realizes that if she draws the Radiant Winterer, the mercenary commander will surely steal it for himself. Gritting her teeth, she draws her standard steel blade instead, whispering a cruel apology as she prepares to end his life with her own hands. With a bloodthirsty shriek, she lunges forward like a striking cobra, her blade cutting through the air with terrifying, lethal speed. Yevgen's eyes widen in absolute shock as he barely registers the blur of her movement, realizing too late that her speed far exceeds anything he has ever faced before. The woman laughs maniacally, unleashing a relentless torrent of strikes that forces Yevgen backward in a desperate defensive scramble. She mocks his grand threats, pressing her advantage as her steel rains down upon him, completely overwhelming his desperate guard. Yevgen's boot slides backward in the dirt, his footing slipping under the relentless pressure of her ferocious assault. Blood sprays into the night as her blade grazes his skin, leaving a stinging trail of crimson and a terrifying reminder of how close he is to death. She leaps into the air with a savage strike, her sword coming down with crushing force as Yevgen desperately raises his blade to block the fatal blow. Watching from the sidelines, Boris cries out in sheer terror, his heart stopping as he witnesses his older brother being brutally pushed to the brink of slaughter. Panic consumes Boris as he realizes the enemy is far too strong, terrified that Yevgen will perish before they can ever reclaim their father's legacy. Suddenly, Boris freezes, a chill running down his spine as he senses a mysterious presence watching them from the shadows of a towering tree above. With a maniacal grin, the treacherous woman swings for a final, decisive strike, declaring an end to his pathetic resistance. The blades clash with a deafening screech as blood splatters across the dirt, pushing Yevgen's body to its absolute limits. Boris screams his brother's name in pure, unadulterated despair, the world seemingly slowing down as tragedy looms closer than ever. Time grinds to a halt as Yevgen's eyes flare with a sudden, desperate realization, a primal survival instinct taking complete control of his mind. With a sudden, shocking move, Yevgen lets go of his own sword, abandoning his weapon in a reckless do-or-die gamble. Lunging forward inside her guard, Yevgen bypasses her blade entirely and grabs her by the shoulder, sending a shockwave of confusion through the arrogant traitor. His fingers wrap tightly around the hilt of the Winterer resting on her back, and instantly, a blinding, frozen energy erupts from the sacred steel. The treacherous woman's eyes pop with sudden, horrific realization as the legendary sword unleashes its dormant power, freezing her solid from the inside out.
The deafening crackle, a massive block of pure mystical ice encases her entire body, instantly halting her mid-strike and silencing her forever.
The mercenaries and Boris gape in absolute horror and awe, stunned by the blinding, radiating power of the legendary weapon as it completely freezes the deadly viper in her tracks.
Exhausted and huffing for breath, Yevgen stands tall with the glowing, ice-cold winterer in his hand, his eyes burning with a terrifying absolute authority as he declares the battle finished.
The trapped traitor stands as a perfect, frozen statue under the pale moonlight, a grim warning to anyone who dares to cross the brothers' path.
The legendary Winterer hums with a deep, ancient power, its blade glowing with a deadly blue frost that crackles in the silent night air.
With his family heirloom finally back in his hands, Yevgen stands victorious amidst the remnants of the battle, his gaze colder than the ice that binds his enemy.
Looking directly at the remaining mercenaries, Yevgen coldly declares his undisputed victory, daring anyone else to step forward and challenge his power.
Impressed by the boy's terrifying display of strength, Commander Daraki nods in approval, agreeing to honor their brutal bargain and let the brothers leave in peace.
Tears of overwhelming relief stream down Boris's face as he runs forward to embrace his brother, their dangerous gamble finally securing their survival. For now. The partner in crime stares in complete, paralyzing disbelief as his treacherous accomplice is turned to solid ice before his very eyes.
Panic overtaking his senses, the desperate man hastily grabs his crossbow, determined to eliminate the threat before he meets the same frozen fate.
He levels the deadly weapon directly at the victorious brothers, ready to squeeze the trigger and end their lives in a final act of spite. In a fraction of a second, a sharp, warning presence flashes through the dark, signaling that another deadly force is already in motion. Barrage of sharp knives rips through the night air, tearing deep into the rogue's arm with brutal precision and drawing a heavy spray of blood. The man screams in agonizing pain, dropping his weapon as the sudden, violent assault catches him completely off guard. He collapses to his knees, clutching his bleeding arm as heavy, intimidating footsteps echo across the dirt, drawing closer and closer. Commander Daraki steps forward with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust, furious that anyone would dare to cheat in a duel right in front of him.
Looking up at the towering trees, the commander calls out a single, sharp name, summoning a silent sentinel from the high branches.
A long, silken braid of snow-white hair sways gracefully in the cold winter breeze as a mysterious figure descends like a phantom.
Daraki coldly commands his loyal subordinate to seize the trembling traitor, leaving no room for mercy or escape.
The enigmatic young warrior, Naya, looks down with cold, piercing purple eyes, devoid of any sympathy for the pathetic rogue.
Like a bolt of lightning, she lunges forward, her swift movements leaving a blur of pure speed in the dark night.
The trapped rogue gasps in utter terror as the deadly girl closes the distance in a single silent heartbeat.
In a sequence of blindingly fast strikes, Naya completely dismantles his pathetic resistance, knocking him senseless before he can even react.
The heavy thud, his loaded crossbow clatters harmlessly onto the dirt, completely neutralized.
Standing victorious, the cold-eyed warrior stares down at her captured target, her silent authority sending a chill through the air.
Shaking with absolute fury, the bound rogue screams that the mercenaries are discarding them like trash, but Daraki merely spits on the ground in utter contempt.
Dragged away, kicking and screaming by the towering mercenaries, the traitors are forced to face the harsh, unforgiving reality of their defeat.
Watching them go, Yevgen delivers a chilling, parting truth, mockingly questioning if the coward would ever dare face his own mother after sinking lower than a maggot.
Suddenly, the silent white-haired girl stops and turns her head, locking her intense, mysterious gaze onto the younger brother.
Boris gasps in surprise, his heart skipping a beat as he stares back at the enigmatic warrior who just saved their lives.
A sudden realization washes over the young boy. She was the mysterious presence watching them from the shadows of the trees all along.
Without another word, the mercenaries fade back into the dark forest, leaving the brothers alone with their hard-won victory. Lying down under the vast, starry sky, Boris's mind races with anxiety as he realizes they have no horses, no money, and nowhere to go. He tries to comfort himself with the thought that they are alive and have reclaimed their father's sword, but his relief is violently shattered.
Out of nowhere, a suffocating force clamps down on his neck, crushing his windpipe as the darkness closes in around him.
Boris chokes and gasps for air, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he looks up into the cold, lifeless eyes of his own brother.
Terrified and confused, the boy desperately claws at Yevgen's hands, fighting against the sudden, unnatural madness possessing his sibling. But his strength quickly fades, his vision blurring as he slips away into the terrifying, icy abyss of death.
With a sudden, violent jolt, Boris's eyes snap wide open in pure panic as his mind is wrenched back to reality. Sitting up with a frantic gasp, the boy clutches his neck, desperately drawing cold night air into his burning lungs.
Trembling from the sheer terror of the nightmare, his eyes immediately dart over to where his older brother is lying. Weakly calling out Yevgen's name, Boris crawls forward, his heart pounding with a lingering, dreadful anxiety.
Fear grips him once again as he finds his brother curled tightly on the cold ground, shivering in absolute silence.
Leaning close, Boris sees Yevgen's face pale and drenched in sweat, his breathing dangerously shallow and uneven.
Letting out a shaky sigh of relief, the boy convinces himself that Yevgen is just utterly exhausted from the brutal battle.
Pulling the warm cloak over them, Boris lies down beside his shivering brother, wishing him a peaceful night as they sleep under the stars.
But in the dark, Yevgen's throat tightens as his pulse begins to race at a terrifying, abnormal speed.
A sudden, excruciating heat surges through Yevgen's veins, his heart pounding like a war drum as a dark, silent agony consumes his body.
Morning light finally breaks over a bustling, peaceful town, a sharp contrast to the terrifying horrors of the night before.
Needing money to survive, the weary brothers enter a local shop, hoping to sell whatever valuables they have left.
Yevgen carefully unwraps a beautifully crafted silver-engraved mirror, presenting it to the merchant with a heavy heart.
Merchant inspects the elegant family heirloom through his magnifying glass, nodding slowly at its pristine condition. Yevgen watches in tense silence, desperately hoping this precious relic of their past will secure their immediate future. But the greedy shopkeeper sneers dismissively, accusing the desperate boys of trying to swindle him for a used item. He lowballs them with a pathetic offer, smugly challenging them to find a better price anywhere else in town. The merchant mockingly adds that the mirror is terribly outdated, causing a painful memory of their beloved mother to flash through Boris's mind. Yevgen's eyes harden with a sharp, icy glare, refusing to let this arrogant man disrespect their mother's memory or rob them of their dignity. Standing firm, the older brother demands a fairer price, his unwavering resolve forcing the merchant to finally back down and seal the deal. Boris stares down in complete silence, a heavy weight pressing against his chest as they sit in the tavern.
Opposite him, Yevgen flashes a warm, bright smile, trying to act as if everything is perfectly normal.
Boris can barely bring himself to hold the piece of bread, let alone eat the food bought with such a painful sacrifice. The thought of selling their mother's precious silver mirror for a mere fraction of its worth makes every bite taste like ash. Clutching his dry bread, the young boy looks up weakly, unable to ignore the dark, unspoken truth looming over them. The moment Boris asks when their father will finally contact them, Yevgen's gentle expression completely vanishes, replaced by a sudden, chilling shadow. Yevgen quickly masks his discomfort, insisting that their father is simply healing his wounds in secret and will summon them when he is ready.
He urges Boris to eat and regain his strength, yet his desperate attempts to reassure his younger brother only raise more doubts.
As Yevgen cuts into the meat, the metallic clank of his cutlery sends a sharp, chilling shiver straight down Boris's spine.
Boris's eyes widen as he stares at his older brother, a terrifying, silent question screaming inside his mind. Noticing the boy's distress, Yevgen pauses, asking with a strained, unsettling smile why he is making such a sad face. Suddenly, the scene violently warps into pitch-black darkness as a suffocating, murderous force violently pins Boris to the floor. Strangled by a merciless grip, Boris desperately claws at the hands choking the life out of him, paralyzed by the recurring nightmare of his brother's betrayal.
Why does this horrific vision continue to plague his mind, refusing to let him find even a moment of peace? But as the suffocating pressure intensifies, a terrifying, icy realization begins to cut through his panic.
This is no dream. The crushing grip around his neck is painfully real, and his own brother is actively trying to kill him right now.
Boris's eyes snap wide in absolute horror as he looks up, desperately trying to find any trace of sanity in Yevgen's lifeless stare.
Standing over him in the dark, Yevgen's face is a cold mask of pure sweat and malice, tightening his deadly grip without a single word.
With terrifying, unnatural strength, Yevgen lifts Boris completely off the ground, leaving the boy to dangle helplessly in the air. Gasps of pure agony escape Boris's lips as his vision begins to blur, his hands weakly batting at the iron-like wrists of his sibling. He tries to scream for his brother to stop, but the words are instantly cut short as Yevgen violently throws him across the room. Boris crashes heavily onto the wooden floorboards, the violent impact knocking the wind completely out of his lungs. Sobbing and gasping for air, the terrified boy struggles to lift his head, his world spinning in a vortex of confusion and fear. Through his tear-filled eyes, he watches in utter dread as Yevgen ignores him entirely, walking directly toward the glowing, ancient sword resting on the table. The Winterer pulses with a blinding, dangerous blue light, its mystical energy humming in response to the growing madness in the room.
Realizing what will happen if his brother draws the legendary weapon, Boris screams out in absolute desperation.
Lunging forward with every ounce of strength he has left, Boris throws his arms around Yevgen's waist, begging him to stop this madness. Tears stream down the boy's face as he pleads with his brother, knowing that something has horribly possessed Yevgen's mind. He screams for Yevgen to wake up, but as the older brother slowly turns, his eyes glow with a terrifying, lifeless crimson glare. With a frantic gasp, Boris suddenly bolts upright in his bed, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Sweat pours down his face as he desperately clutches his burning throat, panting heavily in the morning light. Looking up, he is startled to see Yevgen standing nearby, asking in a gentle, completely normal tone if he had a bad dream. Still trapped in the lingering terror, Boris screams his brother's name, unable to shake the phantom feeling of hands around his neck. He continues to hyperventilate, his eyes wide with distrust as he stares at the person who just tried to murder him. Yevgen steps closer, holding out a cup of water with a look of genuine, innocent concern that only confuses Boris further. For a fleeting, terrifying fraction of a second, Boris imagines his brother's eyes flashing with that same murderous red glow. A wave of sheer panic freezes Boris solid, a cold sweat breaking out across his pale face as his mind races. To hide his terror, Boris quickly double folds over, faking a sudden, painful cramp in his stomach to avoid his brother's touch. Instantly, Yevgen rushes to his side, his voice filled with frantic worry as he asks if his younger brother is in pain. But as Yevgen draws near, a vivid, horrifying flashback of the brutal stranglehold rips through Boris's mind. He can still feel the violent impact of being thrown, the memories of the midnight assault clashing violently with his brother's current warmth. Shivering beneath the blankets, Boris stays curled in a tight ball, his trust in his only protector completely shattered. Smiling gently, Yevgen chuckles softly and reassures him that it must simply be exhaustion from their long, grueling journey. Yet Boris can only stare back in silent horror, realizing that his brother has absolutely no memory of the monster he became last night. Later that day, the two brothers set out once more, walking down a sunlit forest path that feels entirely too peaceful. Boris trails slightly behind, his gaze locked onto Yevgen's back as a storm of dark thoughts brews inside his chest. He knows with absolute certainty that last night was no illusion. Yevgen had truly, physically tried to end his life. Remembering how Yevgen's hands had felt burning hot and clammy, Boris realizes his brother must have been gripped by a sudden, unnatural fever. Staring at the brother who once protected him, a chilling question haunts Boris's soul. Just what kind of dark secret is Yevgen hiding? Suddenly, Yevgen stops and looks back with a gentle, questioning glance, completely unaware of the terrifying truth his little brother now carries. Swallowing his intense panic, Boris forces a shaky nod, desperately trying to mask the dark suspicions swirling in his mind. But inside, the chilling truth is unavoidable. Yevgen is gravely, unnaturally ill, and their endless flight has left them with no one to turn to for help. Staring down the long, lonely path ahead, Boris wonders if they can even survive the grueling journey to their aunt's estate, or if they are simply running toward another dead end.
Gathering every ounce of his courage, the boy reaches out, his trembling voice cutting through the heavy silence of the forest. As Boris demands to know if their father is ever truly coming back, Yevgen freezes mid-step, a sudden heavy tension gripping the air. Suddenly, Yevgen staggers backward, clutching his head as a sharp wave of agonizing pain visibly rips through him. Lunging forward, Boris grabs his brother's arm, begging for the raw, unvarnished truth about whether their father was captured by their ruthless uncle. Yevgen looks back with hollow, tormented eyes, his voice strained as he desperately tries to hold on to his fading composure.
But the agony in Yevgen's mind is too overwhelming, forcing him to stumble back into the brush as he fights against a chaotic storm of fracturing thoughts.
Memories of the horrifying monsters that previously besieged their ancestral home flash violently through his mind, mixing with the dark legends of the lake.
Boris, too, is suddenly struck by a chilling realization. Why are his own memories of those terrifying events so fragmented and vague?
His mind races, frantically retracing the steps of their past, desperately trying to piece together the truth of that fateful night. The phantom terror of Lake Amera claws at his consciousness right before Yevgen's sudden, sullen voice cuts through his racing thoughts. Crumpling onto the cold stone ruins, Yevgen finally drops his head, the heavy weight of a devastating confession hanging in the air. He reveals that their father is gone, having crossed into a dark realm of no return, amidst a chaotic, fiery battle of magic and steel.
Yet even as he speaks of their father's ultimate fate, Yevgen desperately clings to a fragile hope that their loyal protector survived the onslaught.
But the memory of their cruel uncle standing alongside a dark, powerful sorcerer paints a far grimmer reality. Suddenly, the floodgates of Boris's mind burst open, bringing back the terrifying moment someone screamed for him to run. Out of the murky, cursed depths, black, skeletal claws explode with violent force, shattering the peaceful illusion of the past. A massive, ancient monstrosity rises from the abyss, its bones scraping together in a horrifying, deafening screech. Towering high into the sky, the skeletal beast casts a shadow of absolute doom over the paralyzed young boy. Drawing his blades, Yevgen bravely steps between his little brother and the colossal nightmare, ready to fight to his very last breath. Under a blood-red moon, the monstrous wraith roars, its sheer malice shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Paralyzed by the suffocating aura of death, Boris can barely draw breath as the creature's murderous intent locks onto him. Staring directly into the abyss, the young boy's wide eyes reflect the glowing, merciless face of the beast. Giant, fiery red eye opens wide, sealing their fate in a silent promise of absolute destruction. Under the crushing weight of his terror, Boris's grip fails, his sword slipping from his trembling fingers and clattering uselessly to the ground. Losing his footing, the boy falls backward, completely defenseless as the dark claws swipe down to tear him apart. Boris braces for the fatal strike, closing his eyes as the cold breath of death closes in around him. But before the claws can pierce his flesh, a powerful hand violently snatches his collar, defying the inevitable. With a desperate, explosive heave, Yevgen hurls his younger brother out of the path of the deadly assault. Standing alone against the colossal beast, Yevgen unleashes a defiant scream, commanding Boris to flee and never look back. Blinding, magical energy erupts as Yevgen clashes head-on with the monster, the shockwave throwing Boris further into the dark woods. A warm, horrific spray of fresh blood splatters across Boris's face, freezing the young boy's soul in absolute shock. The colossal, terrifying wraith of Lake Amera screeches in the darkness, a relentless storm of violence consuming the battlefield. Covered in his brother's blood, Boris can only stare back in silent horror, his young mind fracturing under the weight of the tragedy. In that terrible instant, the nanny's old warnings about the cursed lake echo in his ears, a grim truth he was too young to understand. The creature was no ordinary beast, but an ancient, unspeakable horror that belonged to neither the living nor the dead. Its burning, fireball-like eyes had stared down at him with an ancient, endless hunger for souls. Overwhelmed by sheer, primal terror, the young boy had turned and fled, his legs carrying him away from the unfolding nightmare. Running blindly through the dark forest, tears of shame and panic streamed down his face, leaving Yevgen behind to face the monster alone.
The painful memory of his own cowardice presses heavily against Boris's chest, casting a dark shadow over his soul.
He had run away like a coward, leaving his brave older brother to fight a battle that should have been their end.
Back in the cold reality of the present, the brothers sit silently around a crackling campfire, the full moon shining down on their unspoken grief.
Clutching his magical sword, Yevgen stares gloomily into the dancing flames, a heavy, unreadable sadness masking his pale face.
Boris keeps his head low, the burning guilt of the past and the terrifying secrets of the present suffocating him in silence.
Breaking the quiet, Yevgen speaks in a low, cold whisper, delivering a sudden, shocking decree that pierces the night. Boris's head snaps up, his eyes wide with disbelief and panic at his brother's unexpected words. Sitting in the cold night air, Yevgen firmly insists they must split up immediately, claiming he can no longer protect Boris because his own time is rapidly running out. A wave of sheer terror washes over Boris as he stares at his brother, the chilling weight of Yevgen's words echoing like a death sentence in his mind.
A sudden, paralyzing shock strikes Boris, his eyes widening in pure disbelief as the horrific declaration sinks in.
Slumping to the ground, the boy desperately shakes his head, flatly refusing to accept a fate where they must part ways. Looking down with fierce determination, Boris vows that no matter what horrors await them, he will never abandon his brother.
But Yevgen's expression only darkens, a bitter, heartbreaking smile crossing his face as he warns that his next fit of madness could end in murder. The shadow of the cursed entity from the lake looms heavily between them, a demonic presence threatening to tear them apart from the inside. Gruesome memory of Aunt Yenny's horrific descent into the abyss of the cursed lake flashes back, a dark warning of what happens to those touched by the waters.
Once a beacon of warmth and kindness, she had returned from Lake Emera as a twisted, unrecognizable shell of her former self.
Her blood-curdling screeches had echoed through the halls, the terrifying sounds of a literal monster possessing her fragile body. In the end, the only cure for her corrupted soul was a tragic, merciful death, a grim fate that now hangs over Yevgen like a ticking clock.
Stepping forward in the quiet of the night, Yevgen draws his legendary glowing blade, the cold steel reflecting the desperate gravity of their situation. He extends the heavy hilt toward his younger brother, commanding him to take the weapon and swing it right there and then. Boris struggles to lift the massive sword, his small frame buckling under the immense, magical weight of the ancestral weapon.
Catching the boy before he falls, Yevgen gently remarks on his weakness, a painful reminder of the harsh world waiting to consume him. Guiding Boris's hands from behind, Yevgen positions him to hold the weapon properly, steadying his stance in a final, quiet lesson of survival.
Looking into his little brother's tear-filled eyes, Yevgen softly explains that his only goal is to ensure Boris can stand strong on his own. But a dark, suffocating shadow falls over the elder brother as he confesses the terrifying truth. The monster inside him will soon try to harm the boy again.
Sobbing, Boris looks back at his protector, his voice cracking as he refuses to accept a future without his beloved brother.
Gripping the cold hilt of the sword, a sickening dread grips Boris's heart, realizing his brother intends to disappear into the night. Hysterically swinging the sword, Boris screams through his tears, declaring he would rather die by his brother's hand than be abandoned in the cruel dark.
Tears stream down his pale face as he begs Yevgen to understand that he is far too weak and helpless to survive this brutal world alone. He points out the chilling reality that ruthless enemies are relentlessly hunting their family's legendary sword, forces far more vicious than anything they faced.
Throwing himself forward, the young boy clings tightly to his brother, sobbing that he would welcome death from Yevgen over a lonely, terrified end.
Suddenly, a sharp, violent blow cracks across Boris's face, the sudden force of his brother's strike echoing like thunder through the silent forest.
Crashing to the dirt, Boris clutches his burning cheek, staring up in utter shock and betrayal at the brother who has never once raised a hand against him. Towering over him with furious, desperate eyes, Yevgen demands to know if his little brother has already forgotten the single most important rule of their lives.
Trembling in the dirt, Boris can only choke back his tears, the heavy silence of the night pressing down on his shattered spirit. With a shaky, heartbroken whisper, the young boy finally repeats the solemn decree his brother had engraved into his very soul.
Softening his tone, Yevgen implores him to never speak of death so easily again, reminding him that he must become an unbreakable shield once he is gone.
Pulling his sobbing brother into a fierce, desperate embrace, Yevgen warns him that from this moment on, no one else in this cruel world will protect him. He presses his final, heavy warning into Boris's heart, to never trust a single soul and to never let his guard down, no matter how agonizing the path becomes. A faint, loving smile touches Yevgen's lips as he promises that this painful endurance will be worth it, for it is the only way to reach a future of endless possibilities. Staring up at his brother's shining, resolute eyes, Boris is struck by the profound weight of a love that is willing to tear itself apart to save him. Breaking the emotional silence, Yevgen raises the glowing sword once more, prepared to make a final, unthinkable gesture of trust. Forcing the weapon into Boris's trembling hands, Yevgen insists that the young boy must take possession of the legendary blade right now. But the true, horrifying purpose of the gift leaves Boris utterly paralyzed. Yevgen commands him to use this very sword to strike him down if the madness ever takes over. Inside Yevgen's fracturing mind, a silent, agonizing panic rages as he desperately tries to piece together the terrifying gaps in his memory. Standing alone in the deepening shadows, he is haunted by the missing hours of his life, terrified of what transpired in the dark. A chilling dread grips his soul as he wonders if he truly succumbed to the same monstrous insanity that claimed Aunt Yenny, turning his blade against his own blood. He vividly remembers the dawn, yet when his senses finally returned, the sun was already sinking below the horizon in a blazing, silent sunset. Sitting alone in the freezing night, Yevgen watches the distant stars, completely isolated within the terrifying cage of his own decaying mind. A single tear escapes his weary eye as he realizes with absolute certainty that he is slowly transforming into a mindless, demonic creature. Staring into the abyss of his own reflection, a primal, suffocating terror takes hold of the legendary warrior. A horrific vision of a blood-drenched future flashes before him, imagining the unbearable nightmare of waking up only to find his little brother's cold corpse at his feet. Under the indifferent gaze of a falling star, the tragic destiny of the children of the Rune begins to spin its dark, inescapable web. The next day, the exhausting toll of the curse becomes undeniable as Yevgen sits slumped against a tree, his heavy eyelids fighting a losing battle against sleep. Boris approaches with deep, agonizing worry, begging his older brother to finally rest after 3 straight days of sleepless vigilance. Yevgen's bloodshot eyes snap open in sudden, disoriented panic, shocked to realize that 3 whole days have vanished in a blur of exhausting paranoia. Desperately trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, Boris kneels in the dirt, gathering kindling for the fire to keep the encroaching shadows at bay. Reaching into his pack with trembling fingers, Yevgen pulls out a beautifully crafted protective garment of their house. Bathing his brother in the warm, golden light of the fading sun, Yevgen hands over the precious ancestral armor, a final, tangible shield to protect the boy from the horrors to come. Boris hesitates, his voice trembling as he stares at the ancestral armor, unable to accept such a priceless shield when it belongs to his brother, the warrior who actually needs its protection. But Yevgen's reply is bone-chilling, a bleak whisper that pierces the cold air. Armor is completely useless to a man who is already walking hand in hand with death. Holding the silver garments in his hands, Boris feels the crushing weight of his brother's gaze, knowing this gift is a physical goodbye he is not ready to face. Leaning in with a desperate, heavy plea, Yevgen begs for one solemn promise, a vow that Boris will never, under any circumstances, seek vengeance for the tragedies that have shattered their lives. The painful history of their homeland rushes to the surface, a brutal cycle of noble factions tearing each other to pieces over petty grudges and endless blood feuds.
If only one side had found the strength to forgive, if only a single soul had chosen to let go of their hatred, the horrifying tragedy of their house could have been completely avoided.
Though their uncle had betrayed their family, the true monster that took their father's life was the crimson-eyed wraith, a demonic force far beyond human politics, a cycle of hatred Boris must never enter.
Yevgen urges his brother to let go of the pain, begging him to forgive the unforgivable, for it is the only way Boris can save his own soul from being swallowed by darkness.
Under the quiet canopy of stars, Yevgen's voice grows weaker, a weary mumble pleading for everything to finally end, for the ghosts of the past to leave them in peace.
As the night deepens, Boris succumbs to his exhaustion, slipping into a deep slumber, while Yevgen battles a crushing, suffocating drowsiness that threatens to steal his mind.
Clutching his head in agony, the elder brother desperately fights to stay awake, terrified of what will happen if he lets his guard down for even a single second. Chilling realization grips Yevgen. If he falls asleep now, the demonic curse lurking inside his veins will break free, consuming his remaining humanity forever. Suddenly, the cold darkness fades into a blinding, celestial light, a whispering breeze calling out to him from beyond the veil of his exhausting nightmare. In a fleeting, beautiful vision, his parents stand waiting for him in a field of endless warmth, welcoming him home to a peaceful place where the pain of this world cannot reach. A soothing, gentle voice echoes in his mind, urging him to surrender to the darkness, promising that he has fought long enough and can finally rest.
In the waking world, the silence of the night is absolute, a heavy shroud draping over the sleeping brothers as the fateful hours slip away.
A falling leaf gently wakes Yevgen, his eyes fluttering open to the cold, stark reality of the forest floor, his mind momentarily free from the suffocating madness.
Staring up at the vast cosmic ocean, he sees the twinkling stars as silent witnesses to his tragic struggle, a lonely warrior at the end of his path. Suddenly, a brilliant streak of light cuts through the darkness, a falling star reflecting in his eyes like a sign of destiny guiding his final decision. Watching the spectacular shower of falling stars paint the night sky, Yevgen feels a profound, sudden clarity wash over his fractured soul. Rising to his feet, a renewed, unbreakable determination fills his chest, the weakness of the curse fading behind a final, heroic purpose. Looking down at his sleeping brother, Yevgen realizes the ultimate sacrifice he must make, finally understanding the one true thing he can do to guarantee Boris's survival.
As the first light of dawn begins to pierce the forest canopy, two silent birds watch from a high branch, signaling the start of a tragic new day. Boris slowly stirs from a deep, unusually peaceful sleep, his mind still echoing with the comforting, imaginary whispers of a protector promising him eternal safety. But as his eyes fully open, a sudden, terrifying emptiness strikes his heart, his gaze falling upon a freshly dug mound of earth in the middle of the clearing. A wave of sheer, paralyzing horror washes over the young boy, his breath catching in his throat as the sickening truth begins to dawn on him. Clutching the cold steel plates of the ancestral armor on his chest, he desperately tries to hold on to the lingering warmth of his brother's final embrace.
Running forward, his world completely shatters as he finds Yevgen lying still in the shallow grave, his lifeless hands resting near his legendary blade, his battle finally over.
Standing alone in the quiet light of the morning, Boris realizes his protector has vanished into the long night, leaving him to face the cruel, relentless world on his own. Staring down at his brother's peaceful, blood-stained face, Boris vows to carry the legacy of their house forward, praying that Yevgen's long-awaited sleep is filled with the happy dreams he so desperately deserved.